The question came at 9:47 p.m. in an empty hallway that smelled of cold coffee and regret. Are you still upset with me? Daniel Brooks had spent 8 months running from the woman who asked it, not because he hated her, but because Evelyn Carter was the only person alive who could destroy the fragile life he'd built for his son. What she didn't know was that her brother had died in his arms. What he didn't know was that she'd known all along. Stay with me until the end of this story. It's about guilt, second chances, and what happens when the truth finally catches up. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The fluorescent lights in the Morgan & Hale corporate offices had a particular quality after 9 o'clock at night. They hummed with a frequency that made Daniel Brooks's jaw ache, a persistent drone that matched the headache forming behind his eyes. He stood in the hallway outside conference room 7B, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass walls, holding a folder he'd retrieved from his desk for the third time that week. The pages inside were blank. He'd been using it as an excuse to stay late, to avoid going home to an empty apartment where his thoughts grew too loud. His phone buzzed against his thigh. Daniel pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen in the dimness. Elena, sister. Don't forget, Jake's basketball game is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I'll have him ready by 9:30. He's been practicing his free throws all week. He wants you to see. Daniel's chest tightened. Jake. 7 years old, gap-toothed, with eyes that still looked at his father like he hung the moon. The kid who didn't know that his dad spent most nights at the office not because of ambition, but because of cowardice. He typed back quickly. I'll be there, promise. The lie came easier now. He'd been practicing for 8 months. Burning the midnight oil again, Brooks? Daniel's head snapped up. His heart performed an uncomfortable acrobatic routine, dropping into his stomach and then launching into his throat in the space of 2 seconds. Evelyn Carter stood 15 feet down the hallway, her silhouette backlit by the glow from her corner office. She wore the same navy suit she'd had on during the afternoon's leadership meeting, though she'd removed her jacket. Her white blouse was crisp despite the late hour, sleeves rolled to her elbows in a gesture that was somehow both casual and commanding. Her dark hair, usually pinned in a neat bun, had loosened slightly, a few strands framing her face. She was 42, Daniel knew. 2 years older than him. She'd been CEO for 8 months, promoted from chief operating officer after the former CEO's retirement. In those 8 months, Daniel had perfected the art of avoiding her. Strategically timed bathroom breaks during meetings, reports submitted electronically rather than in person, sudden urgent calls whenever she approached his desk. Just wrapping up some paperwork, Daniel said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. You're here late, too. Budget reviews. Evelyn took a step closer, and Daniel fought the urge to step back. The board wants a full quarterly analysis by Monday. Right. Of course. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Daniel could hear the ventilation system, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner on another floor, the thunderous pounding of his own pulse in his ears. Daniel. Evelyn's voice was quieter now, and something in her tone made him look directly at her for the first time in months. Her eyes, deep brown, intelligent, and currently filled with something that looked uncomfortably like concern, locked onto his. Are you still upset with me? The question landed like a physical blow. Daniel's grip tightened on the empty folder, crinkling the manila cover. I don't... What? The words came out strangled. Evelyn moved closer, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. You've been avoiding me since I became CEO. You leave meetings early. You won't make eye contact. You submit everything electronically when you used to prefer face-to-face discussions. She stopped 6 feet away from him, arms crossed loosely over her chest. I've been trying to give you space, but 8 months is long enough. If I did something to offend you, if you had issues with my promotion, I need to know. Daniel felt his world tilting on its axis. She thought he was upset about her promotion. She thought this was about corporate politics, about ego, about resentment over being passed over for advancement. If only it were that simple. It's not that, he managed. Your promotion was deserved. Everyone knows that. Then what? Evelyn's expression shifted, frustration bleeding into something softer. Talk to me, Daniel. We used to work well together. Before my promotion, you never had a problem coming to me with concerns or ideas. Now you can barely stand to be in the same room. Before. The word hung in the air like smoke. Before. Before her brother died. Before Daniel's world collapsed. Before he became a single father trying to outrun his guilt. "I'm not upset with you," Daniel said quietly. It was the truth, though not the whole truth. "Then why? I can't do this right now." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Daniel saw Evelyn flinch slightly, and guilt, fresh, sharp, joining the ocean of it he already carried, twisted in his gut. "I'm sorry. I have to go. Early morning tomorrow." He moved past her, keeping his eyes fixed on the elevator bank at the end of the hall. He'd taken maybe 5 steps when her voice stopped him. "Is this about Michael?" Daniel froze. The folder slipped from his nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, Daniel turned around. Evelyn hadn't moved. She stood in the same spot, but her posture had changed. Her arms had dropped to her sides, her shoulders squared but not defensively. She looked tired, Daniel realized. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with late nights and budget reviews. "What did you say?" Daniel's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "My brother." Evelyn's throat worked as she swallowed. "Michael Carter. He died 3 years ago. He was working on your team at the time." The hallway seemed to contract around Daniel, the walls pressing in. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The fluorescent lights were too bright, too harsh, exposing everything he'd tried to keep hidden. "You knew," he said numbly. "You knew he was on my team." "Of course I knew." Evelyn's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Daniel, I've known from the beginning." The floor beneath Daniel's feet felt unstable. 3 years. She'd known for 3 years. She'd worked alongside him, been promoted to a position of authority over him, and she'd known the entire time. "I don't understand," Daniel said. "If you knew, then why—" "Conference room 7B is empty," Evelyn interrupted, gesturing to the glass-walled room behind him. "We should talk, really talk. We're clearly long overdue for this conversation." Every instinct Daniel possessed screamed at him to run, to make an excuse, get in his car, and drive far away from this building and this woman and the memories that were clawing their way up from the place where he'd buried them. But he'd been running for 8 months. 3 years, if he was being honest with himself. And he was so tired. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay." 1. Conference room 7B was one of the smaller meeting spaces, designed for teams of 6 or fewer. The glass walls offered a view of the darkened office floor beyond, rows of empty cubicles, abandoned desks, the skeletal remains of the workday. Evelyn closed the door behind them, and the soft click of the latch sounded final, like a door closing on the version of Daniel who could still pretend. "Sit," Evelyn said, but it wasn't in order. She gestured to the chairs arranged around the oval table. "Please." Daniel sat. Evelyn took the chair across from him, not at the head of the table where her position might suggest, but directly opposite, with only 3 feet of polished wood between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel stared at his hands, clasped on the table in front of him. Working hands, his father would have called them. Broad palms, thick fingers, the kind of hands that look like they should be holding tools rather than pushing papers. There was a small scar on his right thumb from a camping trip with Jake last summer, when he'd been teaching his son to whittle and the knife had slipped. "I don't know where to start," Daniel admitted finally. "Start anywhere," Evelyn said. "Start at the beginning. Start in the middle. Just start." Daniel took a breath that felt like broken glass in his lungs. "Michael was 24, he began, his voice low. "Bright, enthusiastic, sometimes too enthusiastic. He'd volunteer for every project, take on more than he could handle because he wanted to prove himself." A bitter smile twisted Daniel's mouth. "He reminded me of myself at that age. Young, hungry, thinking hard work and long hours were the answer to everything." "He looked up to you," Evelyn said softly. "He used to call me on Sunday nights. He'd talk about the projects he was working on, the things he was learning. Your name came up a lot. Daniel showed me this new approach. Daniel gave me feedback that really helped. Daniel trusted me with a client presentation. The words hit Daniel like punches. He gripped his hands together tighter, knuckles white. 3 years ago, he continued, we were working on the Westfield merger. Do you remember it? Vaguely, before my time in operations. It was massive. $60 million deal, tight timeline, everything riding on due diligence being completed before their fiscal year ended. Daniel's eyes were distant now, seeing not the conference room but a different time, a different version of himself. We were understaffed. Management had cut the team size to save costs, but they hadn't adjusted the timeline. We were running 60, 70-hour weeks. Everyone was exhausted. Evelyn said nothing, just watched him with those intelligent brown eyes. I was a project manager then, running a team of 8. Michael was one of my analysts. Good kid, great work ethic. Daniel's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat. 2 weeks before the deadline, we hit a critical error in the financial models. Someone had transposed numbers in the revenue projections, millions of dollars off. If we'd submitted the report with that error, the whole merger would have collapsed. We'd have been sued into oblivion. I remember hearing about that, Evelyn said. The successful save. It was used as a case study in the next quarter's leadership training. Daniel's laugh was hollow. Successful save. Right. He rubbed his hands over his face. We found the error on a Thursday night at 7 p.m. The report was due to the board Monday morning. We needed at least 48 hours to fix it properly, recalculate everything, verify the corrections. But it was already Thursday evening. You couldn't get an extension? I asked. I called Roger Hale himself. He was CEO then. He said no. The Westfield people were flying in Monday for the presentation. Their board had already scheduled the approval meeting. Delaying would signal that we couldn't handle the pressure, might make them reconsider the whole deal. Daniel's jaw tightened. So Roger told me to make it work, whatever it took. Evelyn's expression had gone very still. I called an emergency team meeting, Daniel continued, told everyone about the error, about the timeline. I asked for volunteers to work through the night shift, Thursday into Friday, to rebuild the models. I told them they could refuse, that I'd understand if they needed rest. I told them I couldn't order them to do it, that it had to be voluntary. Michael volunteered, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. Michael was the first to volunteer. Daniel's voice was thick now. He said, Daniel stopped, swallowed hard. He said, "You can count on me, Daniel. I won't let you down." The silence that followed was crushing. Outside the conference room, a janitor pushed a cart past the glass walls, headphones in, oblivious to the conversation happening inside. I should have said no, Daniel said. I should have seen how exhausted he was, should have recognized that he'd been working every weekend for a month, that he was running on fumes and coffee. But I didn't. I told myself he was an adult, that he knew his limits, that this was an emergency and we all had to sacrifice sometimes. What happened? Evelyn's voice was barely audible. Michael worked all Thursday night. I was there with him. I wasn't going to ask my team to do something I wouldn't do myself. We rebuilt the models together, checked and rechecked every number. By 6 a.m. Friday morning, we had it done. Perfect. Accurate. Ready for submission. Daniel's hands were shaking now. He pressed them flat against the table, trying to still them. I told Michael to go home. Told him to get some sleep, take Friday off, come back Monday fresh. He said he was fine, that he could power through. But I insisted. I said, Daniel's voice broke completely. I said, drive safe. Get some rest. You earned it. Evelyn's face had gone pale. He left the office at 6:15 a.m., Daniel whispered. The roads were slick. It had rained during the night. He was driving on Route 128, headed back to his apartment in Brookline. The police report said he drifted into the opposite lane, no signs of braking, just drifted. He fell asleep, Evelyn said, and it wasn't a question. He fell asleep. Daniel's eyes burned. Hit an SUV head-on. The other driver survived with minor injuries. Michael died instantly. The police called me at 6:47 a.m. I was still at the office, still at my desk, putting the final touches on the report that Michael had died to help complete. Daniel, I was the one who identified his body, Daniel said, the words pouring out now like poison he'd been holding in too long. The hospital called his emergency contact, that was your parents, but they were in Florida, unreachable for hours. I was listed as his supervisor, so they called me. I went to the morgue at 8:30 a.m. on a Friday morning. I looked at a kid who'd called me a mentor, who'd trusted me, who'd volunteered because I'd asked, and I confirmed that yes, that's Michael Carter, employee ID 437829, analyst on my team. Daniel's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I went home afterward, he continued hoarsely, sat on my apartment floor and stared at the wall for 6 hours. My wife, ex-wife now, found me there when she came home from work. She tried to talk to me, tried to get me to eat something, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was Michael saying, "You can count on me, Daniel. I won't let you down." "It wasn't your fault," Evelyn said, and there was fierce certainty in her voice that made Daniel's head snap up. "I approved the overnight shift," he said flatly. "I let an exhausted kid work through the night and then drive home in the morning. I killed him." "No." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes burning into his. "The system killed him. The leadership that refused to extend the deadline killed him. The culture that prioritizes profits over people killed him. You didn't kill my brother, Daniel." "How can you say that?" Daniel's voice rose, months of suppressed anguish finally breaking through. "How can you look at me and say that? You lost your brother because of me." "I lost my brother because of a lot of things." Evelyn's voice matched his intensity. "Because companies treat people like machines. Because sleep deprivation is treated like a badge of honor. Because we've built a world where asking for help is seen as weakness, and working yourself to death is seen as dedication." She stood abruptly, pacing to the glass wall and back, her movements agitated. "Do you know what I did when I heard about Michael's accident?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I was in Chicago, at a conference. I got the call from my mother at 10 a.m. Michael was dead. My baby brother, the kid I used to walk to school, the teenager I taught to drive, the man I was so proud of, was gone. And do you know the first thing I thought?" Daniel shook his head mutely. "I thought, what project was he working on? Was it important? Was his death at least for something meaningful?" Evelyn's face crumpled. "What kind of person thinks that? What kind of world makes that our first question?" Daniel stood slowly, his legs unsteady. "Evelyn, I'm not angry at you, Daniel," she said, and there were tears on her face now, running unchecked down her cheeks. "I've never been angry at you. I'm angry at the system that killed him. I'm angry at myself for encouraging him to work so hard, for telling him that success required sacrifice. I'm angry at every person in leadership who knew our teams were overworked and did nothing. But you?" She looked at him directly. "You tried. I've read the emails, Daniel. I've seen them." Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. "What emails?" "When I became CEO, I requested all files related to Michael's employment. HR gave me everything: his hiring paperwork, his performance reviews, his project assignments, and the emails you sent to leadership about the Westfield timeline." The room tilted. Daniel grabbed the back of his chair for support. "3 emails," Evelyn continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "You sent 3 emails to senior management in the week before Michael died. The first one, 2 weeks before the deadline, saying the timeline was unrealistic and requesting either an extension or additional team members. Denied. The second one, 1 week before, saying your team was approaching burnout and that continuing at the current pace was unsustainable. Denied. The third one, the day before the error was discovered, warning that you were seeing signs of critical fatigue in your team members and that mistakes were becoming more frequent. "They told me to manage it," Daniel said numbly. "Said that was what leaders do." "They ignored you," Evelyn corrected. "They prioritized the deal over people's well-being. And when Michael died, do you know what they did?" Daniel couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "They buried it," Evelyn said, anger creeping into her voice. "Called it a tragic accident, sent flowers to the funeral, and then they used the Westfield merger as a success story. Never mentioned that it cost a man's life, never acknowledged that they'd been warned. They let you carry the guilt alone because it was easier than admitting the system was broken." "I quit," Daniel said hoarsely. After Michael died, I submitted my resignation. I know. I have that letter too. They wouldn't accept it, said the company needed me, that I was too valuable to lose. They offered me a raise, a promotion, said Michael's death was a terrible tragedy, but that I couldn't blame myself, that these things happen. Daniel's laugh was bitter. I turned down the promotion, told them I never wanted to manage people again. They agreed, moved me to a senior analyst role, less responsibility, fewer people depending on me. And then your marriage fell apart, Evelyn said quietly. Daniel's head jerked up. How did you stopped wearing your ring 2 years ago. You started mentioning your sister picking up your son from school. You never talk about co-parenting or custody schedules, just single parenting. Evelyn's expression was gentle. I pay attention, Daniel. Sarah, my ex-wife, she tried, Daniel said. She really did. But I couldn't move past what happened. Every time I looked at her, I thought about the morning Michael died, how I'd come home and sat on the floor and couldn't speak, how I'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being present. She deserved better than a ghost for a husband. You have a son, Evelyn said. Jake. He's 7. For the first time since entering the conference room, Daniel's expression softened. He lives with me full-time. Sarah moved to Seattle for work. We agreed it was better for Jake to have stability here, stay in his school, keep his friends. I have him during the week. She comes back once a month for weekend visits. That's a lot of responsibility for one person. It's what he needs, what I need. Daniel met her eyes. Being Jake's father is the only thing that's kept me going these last 2 years. He needs me to be present, to be functional, to be there. I can't fall apart because I have a 7-year-old counting on me for dinner and homework help and bedtime stories. He saved me, in a way. And that's why you've been avoiding me, Evelyn said. Not because you're angry, but because I'm Michael's sister. Because seeing me reminds you of what happened. Yes. The admission felt like losing a battle he'd been fighting for 8 months. Every time I see you, I think about your brother, about the call I made to identify his body, about the funeral where your mother hugged me and thanked me for being there for Michael, for being a good mentor. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I killed him, that her gratitude was misplaced, but I couldn't. I just stood there and accepted her thanks like a coward. You're not a coward, Evelyn said fiercely. You're a man who's been carrying impossible guilt for 3 years. A man who tried to do the right thing and got crushed by a system that values profit over people. A man who's raising a child alone while dealing with trauma and grief. That's not cowardice, Daniel. That's survival. Daniel shook his head. You don't understand. I understand better than you think. Evelyn moved back to the table, but she didn't sit. She stood with her hands resting on the back of the chair, her posture simultaneously vulnerable and strong. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone at this company? Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. When I became CEO 8 months ago, I made myself a promise, Evelyn began. I promised that no one else would die the way Michael did, that no merger, no deal, no deadline would ever be worth a person's life, that I would change this company from the inside out, even if it meant fighting with the board every single day. That's ambitious, Daniel managed. It's necessary, Evelyn corrected, and I couldn't do it alone. I needed people who understood what was at stake, people who'd seen the cost of our corporate culture firsthand, people who would fight alongside me to change it. Understanding dawned slowly, like sunrise. That's why you kept me. That's why I kept you, Evelyn confirmed. And that's why 6 months ago I promoted you to senior program analyst despite your request to stay in a lower-level role. I didn't want the promotion, Daniel said. I told HR I was happy where I was. I know. You told them you didn't want responsibility for other people's work, that you preferred to work independently. Evelyn's smile was sad. But Daniel, you're a natural leader. Your old team members still come to you for advice. People trust you, respect you, and more than that, you care. You care about the work, about the people, about doing things right. I needed someone like that on my leadership team. Leadership team? Daniel's voice rose in alarm. I'm not on the leadership team. Not officially, not yet. Evelyn's expression turned serious. But I have plans, Daniel, big plans. And I need allies who understand what we're fighting for. Daniel felt overwhelmed, drowning in information he didn't know how to process. Evelyn, I can barely handle my current responsibilities. I have a 7-year-old at home. I work late most nights because I can't face an empty apartment. I'm not leadership material. You work late because you're avoiding me, Evelyn said bluntly. You've been using this office as an escape for 8 months. But Daniel, I'm not the enemy. I never was. I know that, Daniel said, and he meant it. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. Every time I see you, I'm back in that hospital, looking at Michael's body, calling your parents to tell them their son was dead, standing at his funeral pretending I deserved to be there. You did deserve to be there, Evelyn insisted. Michael cared about you. You mattered to him. His death doesn't erase that. It should, Daniel whispered. He should have lived, should have had a full career, met someone, had a family. Instead, he's gone because I made a bad call. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was very soft. Can I tell you what I really think happened that night? Daniel looked up at her. I think my brother made a choice, Evelyn said. He was 24, an adult fully capable of making his own decisions. He volunteered for that overnight shift. He could have said no. You gave him that option, but he chose to help because he believed in the work, and he believed in you. He was too young to make that choice, Daniel said hoarsely. Maybe. Probably. Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But that's on the company, not on you. The company that created a culture where young people feel they have to sacrifice their health and safety to prove themselves. The company that refused to hire enough staff or set realistic timelines. The company that told you to make it work instead of fixing the broken system. I still approved it, Daniel said. I still let him drive home exhausted. And I still encouraged him to push himself, Evelyn countered. Did you know I talked to him that Thursday afternoon, before your emergency meeting? He called me to talk about the project, how stressed the team was, and her voice cracked. I told him to hang in there, that big projects required big sacrifices, that this kind of pressure would make him stronger. I encouraged him to volunteer when you asked. I told him to be the kind of employee who steps up when things get hard. Daniel stared at her. You didn't know what I was going to ask. No, but I knew the culture. I knew how things worked here. And I fed him the same corporate messaging that killed him. Evelyn wiped at her eyes angrily. So if you're guilty, Daniel, then so am I. So are our parents, who praised his work ethic. So are his college professors, who taught him that success requires sacrifice. So is every person who's ever glorified the grind and romanticized burnout. We all killed him, or none of us did. You don't get to carry this alone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth and shared pain. Daniel felt something shifting in his chest, a tectonic movement of the guilt he'd been carrying like armor. I don't know how to let it go, he admitted. The guilt, it's part of me now, part of how I see myself. I'm not asking you to let it go, Evelyn said. I'm asking you to redirect it, channel it into something that matters. Help me change this place, Daniel. Help me make sure no one else dies for a deadline. Daniel laughed, but it came out choked. I'm just a senior analyst. What can I do? You can start by reading this. Evelyn pulled her phone from her pocket, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to face him. Daniel squinted at the screen. It was an email, dated 3 months ago, addressed to the board of directors. The subject line read, Proposed Employee Wellness and Safety Initiative. Scroll down, Evelyn instructed. Daniel took the phone, scrolling through the document. It was comprehensive. Mandatory rest periods between shifts, caps on weekly working hours, wellness checks for employees on high-stress projects, additional hiring to distribute workloads, mental health resources, anonymous reporting systems for unsafe working conditions. This is incredible, Daniel breathed. Did the board approve it? They approved a limited pilot program, Evelyn said. 6 months, 1 department, with metrics to measure productivity impact. If productivity doesn't decrease, they'll consider expanding it. Which department? Evelyn's smile was complicated. Yours. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Your department has been running under the new protocols for 3 months now. Mandatory time off, capped hours, weekly check-ins about workload and stress levels. Haven't you noticed? Daniel thought back. Now that she mentioned it, yes. His manager had been strangely insistent about him taking his allocated vacation days. There'd been more staff hired than usual. The expectation of instant email responses had disappeared. He'd assumed it was just his manager's personal style, not a company-wide pilot. I didn't realize, he said. That's because I didn't want to make a big announcement and bias the results, Evelyn explained. But Daniel, the metrics are incredible. Productivity is up 15%. Employee satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 5 years. Turnover has dropped by 20%. People are happier, healthier, and doing better work. Then why isn't the board expanding it? Because they're convinced it's a fluke. They think your department was already high-performing and that's why the numbers are good. They want to see it replicated in a struggling department before they'll approve company-wide implementation. Evelyn took her phone back, pocketing it. That's where you come in. Me? I want to expand the pilot to the operations division. It's been struggling, high turnover, low morale, missed deadlines. If we can turn it around using the new protocols, the board will have to approve full implementation. Evelyn paused. But I need someone to lead the expansion. Someone who understands the stakes. Someone people will trust and follow. Someone who's lived through the consequences of the old way. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. Evelyn, I can't. You can, she interrupted. You're already doing it, Daniel. Every time you check in with your colleagues, every time you encourage someone to go home at a reasonable hour, every time you push back on unrealistic deadlines, you're leading. You just don't call it that. I'm a single dad, Daniel protested. I work late as it is, taking on more responsibility. You work late because you're avoiding an empty apartment, Evelyn said gently. But Daniel, what if you had a reason to go home? What if the work you were doing meant something? What if, instead of hiding from your son because you don't think you deserve him, you went home knowing you'd spent the day protecting other people's children from losing their parents to corporate greed? The words hit Daniel like a freight train. He sat down heavily, his legs suddenly unable to support him. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Evelyn's voice was soft but relentless. You avoid me because I remind you of Michael. You work late because you're punishing yourself. You turn down promotions because you don't think you deserve success. You barely see your son because you don't believe you deserve happiness. You've turned guilt into a lifestyle, and it's killing you just as surely as that overnight shift killed my brother. Stop, Daniel said, but there was no force behind it. Michael died, Evelyn continued, moving to crouch beside his chair so they were at eye level. It's tragic and unfair, and it should never have happened. But Daniel, you're still alive. You have a son who needs you, a career that could matter, a chance to prevent other families from going through what mine did. You can choose to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself, or you can choose to make his death mean something. How? Daniel's voice broke. How do I make it mean something? Help me change this company, Evelyn said simply. Lead the operations pilot. Show the board that treating people like humans instead of resources doesn't just work, it works better. Give me the data I need to force them to change, and in the process, maybe give yourself permission to forgive yourself for being human. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd become CEO. He saw grief in her eyes, yes, but also determination, strength, purpose. She'd lost her brother too, but she'd chosen to channel that loss into change, rather than letting it consume her. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted. I don't need you to be perfect, Evelyn said. I just need you to try. Can you do that? Daniel thought about Jake, 7 years old and waiting for him at his sister's house. Thought about the basketball game tomorrow that he'd promised to attend. Thought about all the nights he'd stayed late at the office, telling himself he was working but really just hiding from the life he didn't think he deserved. He thought about Michael, 24 and brilliant and gone. About the system that had killed him. About all the other young people working themselves to exhaustion right now, this very moment, in offices across the country. If I say yes, Daniel said slowly, I need conditions. Evelyn straightened, her expression shifting to professional interest. Name them. 1. I work normal hours. No late nights unless there's a genuine emergency. I have a son who needs me to pick him up from school and help with homework and tuck him in at night. That's non-negotiable. Done. 2. I need support, training, resources, authority to make real changes. I can't just be a figurehead while everything stays the same. You'll have everything you need, Evelyn promised, including my full backing with the board. 3. Daniel hesitated. 3. If this doesn't work, if I fail, I need your word that you won't blame yourself the way I blamed myself when Michael died. This is my choice, my decision. Win or lose, it's on me. Evelyn's eyes softened. Only if you agree to the same thing. If this works, if we change this company, you let go of the guilt over Michael. You accept that you did your best in an impossible situation. Deal? Daniel extended his hand. After a moment, Evelyn took it. Her grip was firm, warm, alive. Deal, Daniel said. They shook on it, and something in the conference room shifted. The weight Daniel had been carrying didn't disappear. It would never disappear completely. But for the first time in 3 years, it felt bearable. Shared. I should go, Daniel said, glancing at his watch. It was nearly 11 p.m. I have a basketball game to attend in the morning. Jake's game? Evelyn smiled. Tell him good luck from me. You don't even know him. Not yet, Evelyn agreed. But if we're going to be working together, I'd like to. Is it okay if I ask about your life, Daniel? Your real life? Not just the work parts? Daniel felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that would be okay. They walked out of the conference room together, down the hall to the elevators. The building was silent around them, the only sound their footsteps and the distant hum of the HVAC system. Evelyn, Daniel said as they waited for the elevator. Thank you. For what? For not hating me. For giving me a chance. For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Evelyn stepped inside, then turned to face him. Daniel, I never hated you, she said. I admired you. Michael did too. He saw you as the kind of leader he wanted to become, someone who cared about people, who fought for what was right even when it was hard. The fact that you couldn't save him doesn't change that. The doors started to close. Daniel shot his hand out to stop them. The initiative, he said. The wellness and safety protocols, does it have a name? Evelyn's smile was bittersweet. The Michael Carter Memorial Program. The board approved the name last month. They thought it sounded good for PR. And what do you think? I think my brother would be proud that his death is saving other people's lives, Evelyn said quietly. I think he'd want his name on something that matters. And I think he'd be especially proud that you're the one leading it. The doors closed before Daniel could respond. He stood in the empty hallway, staring at his reflection in the polished steel, seeing not a man running from his past, but maybe, just maybe, a man ready to face his future. He pulled out his phone and texted his sister, still on for 9:30 tomorrow. Can't wait to see Jake play. Love you both. Then he texted his ex-wife. Just wanted to let you know, things are changing. Good changes. Jake's going to have a dad who's really present. I promise. And finally, to a number he'd never quite been able to delete from his contacts, Michael's old cell phone that had been disconnected for 3 years. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I'm going to make sure your death meant something. I hope that's okay. The message bounced back immediately, number no longer in service. But somehow, typing the words helped anyway. Daniel rode the elevator down to the parking garage, got in his car, and drove home. Not to an empty apartment he was avoiding, but to a place where tomorrow he would wake up, attend his son's basketball game, and then return to work with purpose for the first time in 3 years. The guilt didn't disappear. The grief didn't vanish. The memory of Michael's face in the morgue would probably haunt him until his dying day. But for the first time since that terrible Friday morning, Daniel Brooks felt something other than crushing responsibility and paralyzing shame. He felt hope. And that, he thought as he pulled into his parking space, was a start. The gymnasium smelled like floor wax and teenage sweat, even though the game hadn't started yet. Daniel sat in the bleachers, wedged between his sister Elena and a woman he didn't know who was shouting encouragement at kids who hadn't even taken the court. The scoreboard clock read 9:58 a.m. Jake's team, the Brookline Bruins, huddled near their bench in matching blue jerseys, their coach gesturing animatedly while 7-year-olds fidgeted and failed to pay attention. Daniel spotted his son immediately, number 12, smaller than most of his teammates, dark hair sticking up in a cowlick that no amount of gel could tame. Jake was bouncing on his toes, scanning the bleachers, and when his eyes found Daniel, his entire face lit up like sunrise. Daniel's chest constricted. He waved, and Jake waved back so enthusiastically he nearly hit the kid standing next to him. "He's been asking about you since 6 this morning," Elena murmured, nudging Daniel's shoulder. "Wanted to make sure you'd really come." Guilt twisted in Daniel's stomach, familiar and sharp. "I told him I'd be here." "You've told him that before," Elena said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just tired truth. She was 43, 3 years older than Daniel, with their mother's auburn hair and their father's steady gaze. She'd been picking up Jake from school 3 days a week for the past year, covering for Daniel's late nights at the office. "I'm glad you actually made it this time." "Me too," Daniel said, and meant it. The referee's whistle blew. The game began. Daniel watched his son play basketball with the intense seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster, and tried to ignore the phone in his pocket that had buzzed 3 times since he'd sat down. Jake wasn't particularly good at basketball. He was small for his age, still growing into his coordination, but he tried with everything he had. He chased the ball with determination, set picks that were more enthusiasm than technique, and took a shot from the free throw line that bounced off the rim so hard it nearly hit him in the face. The other team scored first, then second, then third. "They're getting destroyed," the woman next to Elena said cheerfully. "But at least they're having fun, right?" Daniel's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, intending to silence it, and saw 4 messages from Evelyn. Evelyn. "Morning. Hope Jake's game goes well." Evelyn. "Just got an email from the board. They want to meet Monday to discuss the operations pilot." Evelyn. "Also found some of Michael's old project notes. Thought you might want to see them. No pressure." Evelyn. "Sorry for texting on a Saturday. This can wait. Enjoy the game." Daniel stared at the messages, something warm and uncomfortable settling in his chest. Last night's conversation felt both immediate and distant, like something that had happened to someone else. In the harsh light of Saturday morning, surrounded by screaming parents and squeaking sneakers, the idea of leading a company-wide initiative seemed absurd. He typed back, "Game's good. Jake just missed a shot, but he's trying hard. Talk Monday?" The response came within seconds. "Absolutely. Tell Jake I said good luck." Daniel pocketed his phone and forced himself to focus on the game. The Bruins were down by 8 points. Jake got the ball, dribbled twice, and passed it to a teammate who immediately threw it out of bounds. The coach called timeout. "He's doing great," Elena said, and Daniel knew she was lying to make him feel better. "Really improved since last week." "Does he talk about me?" Daniel asked suddenly. "When I'm working late? Does he ask why I'm not there?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. On the court, the teams were breaking from their huddles, retaking positions. "He asks if you're okay," Elena said finally. "He doesn't say, 'Why isn't Dad here?' He says, 'Is Dad okay? Is he sad again?' He's a perceptive kid, Danny. He knows something's wrong. He just doesn't know what." The referee's whistle blew. The game resumed. Daniel watched his son run down the court and felt something cracking open inside his chest. "I'm trying," Daniel said. "I know I haven't been great, but I'm trying." "I know you are," Elena said gently. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "And for what it's worth, I think coming here today is a good start." The Bruins lost by 12 points. Jake fouled out in the 3rd quarter. When the final buzzer sounded, he looked crushed for approximately 30 seconds before another kid suggested they all go get pizza, and suddenly losing didn't matter anymore. Daniel met Jake at the edge of the court. His son barreled into him, sweaty and smelling like effort, wrapping thin arms around Daniel's waist. "Did you see my free throw?" Jake asked, his voice muffled against Daniel's shirt. "I did. That was a tough shot. Coach says I need to bend my knees more." Jake pulled back, looking up at his father with eyes that were Daniel's own staring back at him. "Are you coming to pizza?" "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel said, and watched his son's face transform with joy. They went to a place called Angelo's. a cheerfully chaotic restaurant with red checkered tablecloths and a jukebox that only played hits from the 1980s. The team crowded around two long tables, 12 7-year-olds arguing about toppings and who'd played the best defense. Daniel sat at the adult table with Elena, the coach, and a handful of other parents, half listening to conversations about school fundraisers and carpooling while keeping one eye on Jake. His son was laughing, gesturing wildly while telling a story about how he'd almost stolen the ball from the other team's best player. The other kids were laughing too, fully invested in Jake's animated reenactment. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, seeing his son happy and animated and normal. "He's a good kid," the coach said, following Daniel's gaze. Mr. Patterson was in his 50s, a retired high school teacher who volunteered his Saturdays to teach fundamentals to children who barely understood what a zone defense was. "Jake works harder than anyone on the team, doesn't have the natural talent some of the other kids do, but he makes up for it with heart." "Sounds like his mother," Daniel said, then immediately felt guilty. Sarah had been nothing but supportive during their marriage, even when Daniel had been falling apart. The divorce had been his fault, his inability to function, his decision to push away everyone who tried to help. "Well, he's got a good role model," Mr. Patterson said. "Lots of dads say they'll come to games and practices, then never show up. You being here matters." Daniel wanted to explain that this was the first game he'd attended all season, that he'd missed Jake's birthday party last month because of a work deadline, that he was a father in name only most days, going through the motions while his sister did the actual parenting. But Mr. Patterson was already turning to answer another parent's question about next week's practice schedule, and the moment passed. The pizza arrived. Daniel ended up with 2 slices of pepperoni and a plate that Jake had somehow filled with nothing but breadsticks. They ate together, father and son, while conversation flowed around them. "Dad," Jake said, mouthful of bread, "can we go to the park after this?" Daniel's instinct was to say no. He had emails to answer, reports to review, a presentation to prepare for Monday's board meeting. But then he remembered Evelyn's words from last night. "You work late because you're punishing yourself. You barely see your son because you don't believe you deserve happiness." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Yeah, we can go to the park." Jake's smile was worth everything. They went to Brookline Park, a sprawling green space with a playground, walking paths, and a duck pond that Jake insisted they visit first. They stood at the edge of the water, tossing pieces of leftover breadstick to a family of mallards, while the afternoon sun filtered through the trees. "Mom called last night," Jake said suddenly. "From Seattle." Daniel's hand paused mid-throw. "Yeah? What did she say?" "She said she's coming to visit next month. Wants to take me to that science museum I like." Jake threw his breadstick. A duck snatched it mid-air. "She asked if you were doing okay." "What did you tell her?" Jake shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of Daniel's own mannerisms it was startling. "I said you work a lot, but that you're less sad than you used to be." He looked up at his father. "Are you less sad, Dad?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He knelt down so he was at Jake's eye level, bringing them face to face. "I'm working on it," Daniel said honestly. "I've been sad for a while, but I'm trying to be better. For you." "You don't have to be better for me," Jake said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "You just have to be here." Daniel pulled his son into a hug, holding him close enough to feel the steady beat of Jake's heart against his chest. "I know, buddy. I know." They spent another hour at the park. Jake played on the swings while Daniel pushed him higher and higher, both of them laughing when Jake's shoes nearly touched the tree branches. They played catch with a tennis ball Daniel found in his car. They sat on a bench and ate ice cream from a vendor, chocolate for Jake and vanilla for Daniel, while discussing important matters like whether dinosaurs could beat robots in a fight and what superpower would be most useful. It was nearly 5 o'clock when they finally headed home. Jake fell asleep in the car, his head lolling against the window, chocolate ice cream still smudged on his chin. Daniel carried him inside, tucked him into bed still wearing his basketball jersey, and stood in the doorway watching his son sleep. His phone buzzed. Daniel pulled it out, expecting another message from Evelyn. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Unknown. "Mr. Brooks? This is Patricia Kim from HR. Sorry to contact you on the weekend, but CEO Carter asked me to send you preliminary materials for Monday's board meeting. Files attached. Please review before 9 a.m. Monday. Thanks. Daniel opened the attachments. There were 6 documents. The original Wellness Initiative proposal, the pilot program results from his department, projected implementation plans for operations, budget analyses, employee survey data, and something titled Memorial Program Implementation Framework. He downloaded them all, then moved to the kitchen table with his laptop. He told himself he'd just skim them quickly. 2 hours later, he was still reading, completely absorbed. The data was compelling. His department's productivity hadn't just maintained during the wellness pilot, it had increased significantly. Employee sick days had dropped by 30%. Turnover had virtually stopped. The anonymous survey responses were overwhelmingly positive. Finally feel like the company values me as a person. Having mandatory time off made me more efficient during work hours. My manager actually asks how I'm doing now, and means it. But it was the Memorial Program Implementation Framework that held Daniel's attention. Evelyn had outlined a comprehensive plan, not just for operations but for the entire company. Mandatory rest periods, caps on consecutive working hours, mental health resources, anonymous reporting for unsafe conditions, regular workload assessments, and at the center of it all, a simple principle. No deadline is worth a life. There was a section titled Program Leadership that made Daniel's stomach flip. His name was listed as Primary Implementation Director, with a detailed job description that included things like cross-departmental coordination, board presentations, and culture change management. It was more responsibility than he'd ever held, more visibility than he'd wanted since Michael's death. It was terrifying. It was also, Daniel realized as he read through the framework again, the most important thing he could possibly do with his life. His phone rang. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. "Did Patricia send you the materials?" Evelyn asked without preamble. "Yeah, I've been reading them." "Evelyn, this is..." Daniel struggled for words. "This is huge. Company-wide implementation, board approval required, complete restructuring of how we operate. This could actually change everything." "If we can sell it to the board," Evelyn said. There was something in her voice, uncertainty maybe, or fear. "They're skeptical. They think the success in your department is an anomaly. They want hard proof it can work in a struggling division before they'll approve full rollout." "So we give them proof," Daniel said. "Operations pilot, 6 months, same protocols. We document everything, measure every metric, show them it works." "That's the plan," Evelyn paused. "Are you having second thoughts?" Daniel looked down the hall toward Jake's room where his son slept peacefully. He thought about Michael, 24 and dead because the system valued profit over people. He thought about all the other Michaels out there right now, working overnight shifts, driving home exhausted, one mistake away from tragedy. "No second thoughts," Daniel said. "I'm in. Completely." He could hear Evelyn's relief through the phone. "Thank you. I know this is asking a lot, especially with Jake and everything else you're managing." "Actually, I think it might help," Daniel admitted. "Give me a reason to leave work at reasonable hours. Hard to justify staying late when I'm literally implementing a program about work-life balance." Evelyn laughed, and the sound was warm. "Good point. How was the game, by the way?" "We lost by 12. Jake fouled out. It was perfect." "I'm glad you went." "Me too." Daniel hesitated. Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Last night you said you'd read all of Michael's files, his emails, his project notes, everything." Daniel's throat tightened. "Was there, did he ever say anything about me? After the Westfield project? I've always wondered if he blamed me." The silence stretched long enough that Daniel thought the call had dropped. "Evelyn?" "There was one email," Evelyn said finally, her voice thick. "He sent it the Monday after the overnight shift, after the merger was approved. It was addressed to me." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. "What did it say?" "It said, 'Just wanted to let you know we pulled off the impossible this weekend. Daniel is the best manager I've ever had. He works harder than anyone, and he never asks us to do anything he won't do himself. I'm lucky to work for someone who actually cares." Evelyn's voice cracked. "He sent it at 9 a.m. Monday morning, 4 days before he died. Daniel pressed his free hand against his eyes, trying to contain the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He didn't blame you, Daniel, Evelyn said softly. He admired you, right up until the end. I wish I'd told him. Daniel stopped, unable to continue. Told him what? That he didn't have to prove anything, that he was already good enough, that I saw his potential and he didn't need to work himself to death to demonstrate it. Daniel's voice was raw. I wish I'd told him to go home earlier, to rest, that his health mattered more than any project. He knew you cared, Evelyn said. Maybe he didn't know the specifics, but he knew. And Daniel? The fact that you wish you'd said those things means you can say them to the people you lead now. You can build the culture Michael deserved to work in. Is that what this is really about? Daniel asked. The memorial program? Are we doing this for Michael or for ourselves? Does it matter? Evelyn's response was immediate. Maybe we're doing it because we miss him. Maybe we're doing it because we feel guilty. Maybe we're doing it because we're angry at a system that treated him like he was disposable. But Daniel, regardless of why we're doing it, we're still doing it. And people will be safer because of that. That's what matters. Daniel thought about Jake, asleep down the hall, about all the other children who might grow up without parents because companies cared more about deadlines than people, about the future they could build if they actually tried. Monday morning, Daniel said. I'll be ready for the board meeting. What time? 9 a.m., conference room A. Dress professionally. This is the full board, not just the executives. Evelyn paused. And Daniel, thank you for doing this, for trusting me, for being willing to try. Thank you for not giving up on me, Daniel said, even when I was avoiding you. Never crossed my mind, Evelyn said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing logistics and strategy for Monday's presentation. When they finally hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by documents about workplace safety and employee wellness, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He worked until midnight preparing notes and reviewing data. When he finally closed his laptop and headed to bed, he paused outside Jake's room. His son had kicked off his blankets and was sprawled diagonally across the mattress, still wearing his basketball jersey. Daniel moved quietly into the room, straightening the blankets and tucking them around Jake's small form. His son stirred slightly, mumbling something about free throws, then settled back into sleep. I'm going to do better, Daniel whispered. I'm going to be here more, be present more. You deserve a dad who shows up, and I'm going to be that dad. Jake didn't hear him, didn't respond, but saying the words out loud felt like making a promise, and Daniel Brooks had always kept his promises. Eventually. He retreated to his own room, set his alarm for 7 a.m., and lay in the darkness thinking about Michael Carter, about Evelyn's determination, about the presentation on Monday and the pilot program, and the possibility of actually changing something that mattered. Sleep didn't come easily. Daniel's mind raced through scenarios, potential questions from the board, rebuttals to anticipated objections. He thought about operations, a department he'd worked with but never managed, filled with people he knew by name but not well. Could he really lead them through a major cultural shift? Did he have the skills, the authority, the credibility? Did it matter if he wasn't sure as long as he tried? Somewhere around 2 a.m., Daniel's phone lit up with another message. He reached for it groggily. Evelyn. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about Monday. Sorry for the late text. Daniel typed back. Me neither. What's keeping you up? Evelyn. Fear that I'm asking too much of you, that I'm putting my grief onto your shoulders and calling it leadership. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then called her. She answered on the first ring. You're not putting anything on me that I wasn't already carrying, Daniel said without preamble. The grief was there. The guilt was there. You're just giving me a way to channel it into something productive instead of destructive. You sure about that? Evelyn's voice was tired. Because I keep second-guessing this whole thing. What if the board says no? What if operations fails? What if we make things worse instead of better? Then we fail, Daniel said simply. We fail knowing we tried to do the right thing. That's better than succeeding at something that doesn't matter. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. When did you become the optimistic one? About 4 hours ago, when I actually read your implementation framework and realized you've been planning this for months, Daniel said. This isn't some impulsive grief response, Evelyn. This is thorough, comprehensive, thought out. You've done the work. You've built the foundation. Now we just have to execute. Just, Evelyn repeated. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's also right. Daniel shifted in bed, staring at the ceiling. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone? Please? The night Michael died after I identified his body, I went home and I made a list, Daniel said. A list of everyone I needed to apologize to. Your parents, your family, his friends, his girlfriend at the time. The list was 17 names long. I was going to visit each person, tell them it was my fault, beg for forgiveness. Did you? No, because my wife, ex-wife now, found me writing it. She took the paper away and she said something I've never forgotten. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's face that terrible night. She said, "You can spend your life apologizing for what happened, or you can spend it making sure it never happens again. One of those choices honors Michael. The other just makes you feel better." Smart woman, Evelyn murmured. Yeah. Too smart to stay married to someone drowning in guilt. Daniel's voice was wry. But she was right. Apologizing wouldn't bring Michael back. Wallowing in guilt wouldn't change anything. The only meaningful response to tragedy is prevention. Is that what we're doing? Preventing the next tragedy? That's exactly what we're doing, Daniel said firmly. We're building a company where people go home safe, where deadlines matter less than health, where profit doesn't come at the cost of lives. If the board doesn't see the value in that, if operations fails, if we get fired for trying, at least we tried. At least we fought for something that mattered. Evelyn laughed, but it sounded like she was crying too. How are you this certain when 12 hours ago you were convinced you didn't deserve forgiveness? I'm not certain, Daniel admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of working late to avoid an empty apartment and avoiding you because you remind me of my failures. I want to try being brave instead. See if it fits better. And if it doesn't? Then I'll fail spectacularly while attempting something worthwhile, which is still better than succeeding at hiding from my life. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. Thank you for this conversation, for saying yes, for being willing to take this risk with me. Thank you for asking, Daniel said, for believing I could do this even when I didn't believe it myself. Get some sleep, Daniel. Monday's going to be intense. You too, boss. Don't call me boss, Evelyn said, but he could hear the smile in her voice. We're partners in this. Equals. Partners, Daniel agreed. I like the sound of that. They said goodnight. Daniel set his phone back on the nightstand and closed his eyes. This time, sleep came easier. He dreamed of boardrooms and basketball games, of presentations and playgrounds, of a future where going home on time wasn't a luxury, but a guarantee. When his alarm went off at 7 a.m., Daniel woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He made breakfast for Jake. Pancakes in the shape of basketballs that came out more like misshapen blobs, but Jake loved them anyway. They ate together, talking about nothing important and everything important simultaneously. Then Daniel drove his son back to Elena's house, hugged him tight, and promised to pick him up Monday after school. You seem different, Dad, Jake said before running inside. Happier, maybe. Maybe I am, Daniel said. Maybe things are changing. Good changes? Yeah, buddy. Good changes. The rest of Sunday passed in preparation. Daniel reviewed the board presentation 17 times, memorizing key statistics and anticipating questions. He picked out his best suit, navy blue, rarely worn, a remnant from when he'd cared about advancement. He called his sister and asked her to keep Jake an extra hour Monday in case the meeting ran late. He texted Evelyn 3 times with minor questions and received encouraging responses each time. By Sunday night, Daniel was as ready as he'd ever be. He went to bed early, lay in the darkness, and thought about Michael Carter, about a 24-year-old kid who'd trusted his manager and paid for it with his life, about a sister who'd turned grief into action, about a single father who'd spent 3 years running from guilt and was finally ready to face it. Tomorrow, Daniel thought as sleep finally claimed him. Tomorrow everything changes. He had no idea how right he was. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel significant. Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., adjusting his navy tie for the third time. The face staring back at him looked different somehow. Older, maybe, or just more present. 3 years of guilt had carved lines around his eyes. But this morning, there was something else there too. Determination, perhaps, or just the desperate hope that he could actually pull this off. His phone buzzed on the counter. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen. Evelyn. Remember, we're not asking permission. We're showing them why this is necessary. You've got this. Daniel typed back. See you at 8:30. Coffee first. Evelyn. Already brewing. My office. Daniel arrived at Morgan & Hale at 8:15, earlier than he'd been to work in months. The building was quiet in that particular way offices are before the real workday begins. A handful of dedicated employees scattered across floors, the cleaning crew finishing their rounds, the security guard at the front desk looking mildly surprised to see Daniel in a suit. Big meeting today, Mr. Brooks? The guard asked. Something like that, Daniel said, and headed for the elevators. Evelyn's office was on the top floor, corner position with windows overlooking the Boston skyline. Daniel had been inside exactly twice, once for his performance review last year, and once 3 years ago when he'd tried to submit his resignation after Michael's death. Both times he'd been too consumed with his own thoughts to really notice the space. Now, stepping through the door Evelyn held open, he actually looked around. The office was elegant but not ostentatious. A large desk dominated one side, its surface organized with military precision. Laptop, dual monitors, a small stack of files, and a framed photograph Daniel couldn't quite see from this angle. The other side held a small conference table with 4 chairs, and it was there that Evelyn had set up for their pre-meeting preparation. 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat waiting, along with printed copies of their presentation materials. "You're early," Evelyn said, closing the door behind him. She wore a charcoal gray suit with a burgundy blouse, her hair pulled back in that same neat bun. She looked professional, composed, and only the slight tension around her eyes suggested she might be as nervous as Daniel felt. "Couldn't sleep," Daniel admitted, kept running through potential questions. "Me too." Evelyn moved to the conference table, gesturing for Daniel to join her. "I've been up since 4. Made the mistake of reading the board members' bios again. 3 of them are former Wall Street executives. They're going to push back hard on anything that looks like it might impact quarterly earnings." Daniel sat, wrapping his hands around the coffee mug. The warmth helped steady him. "So we lead with the productivity numbers. Show them that treating people well doesn't just prevent tragedy. It improves the bottom line." "That's the strategy," Evelyn agreed. She pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. "I added a section last night. Comparison data from competitors who've implemented similar programs. Tech companies mostly. Google, Microsoft, Salesforce. They've all seen productivity gains and retention improvements." Daniel scanned the document. The data was compelling, the argument airtight. On paper, this should be an easy sell. But Daniel had been in corporate America long enough to know that logic didn't always win. "They're going to ask about the operations department specifically," Daniel said, thinking out loud. "Why we chose a struggling division for the expansion. Whether we're setting ourselves up for failure." "Let them ask," Evelyn said, and there was steel in her voice. "We chose operations precisely because it's struggling. If the program only works in high-performing departments, it's not really a solution. We need to prove it can turn things around even in difficult circumstances." "And if it doesn't?" Evelyn met his eyes directly. "Then we'll have data about what doesn't work, which is still valuable. But Daniel, I don't think we're going to fail. Operations is struggling because people are burned out, demoralized, overworked. The wellness program addresses exactly those issues. Give people rest, reasonable hours, support. They'll perform better. It's not complicated." "The board will complicate it," Daniel said. "The board always complicates things." Evelyn's smile was wry. "That's why they pay themselves 6 figures to attend 4 meetings a year." Despite his nerves, Daniel laughed. They spent the next hour reviewing the presentation, anticipating questions, refining their arguments. Evelyn walked Daniel through each board member's particular concerns and biases. Robert Chen worried about shareholder value. Patricia Morrison cared about legal liability. James Bradford was obsessed with industry positioning. By 8:45, Daniel felt as prepared as he'd ever be. "One more thing," Evelyn said as they gathered their materials. She moved to her desk, picked up the framed photograph Daniel had noticed earlier, and handed it to him. "I want you to see this before we go in there." The photograph showed two teenagers standing in front of a Christmas tree. The girl was clearly a younger Evelyn, same intense eyes, same determined expression, wearing a green sweater and holding what looked like a science fair trophy. Next to her stood a gangly teenage boy with an enormous smile, one arm slung around Evelyn's shoulders. He was laughing at something off camera, his whole face lit with joy. "Michael," Daniel breathed. "He was 16 there. I was 18, home from college for the holidays." Evelyn's voice was soft. "He'd just won second place at the state science fair for a project about renewable energy. He was so proud, talked for hours about how he was going to change the world." Daniel stared at the photograph, at Michael's young, alive face. The Michael he'd known had been 24, professional, already showing signs of the corporate exhaustion that would kill him. This Michael was different, unguarded, hopeful, full of possibility. "He did want to change the world," Daniel said quietly. "He talked about it sometimes. During late nights on the Westfield project, he'd tell me about his plans, wanted to move into sustainable business practices, help companies reduce their carbon footprint. He had this whole vision for how corporations could be profitable and ethical simultaneously." "He believed in that," Evelyn said. "Believed people were fundamentally good, that systems could change, that hard work and integrity would win out." Her throat worked as she swallowed. The world took that hope and crushed it, turned him into just another employee ID number, another acceptable loss in pursuit of quarterly earnings. "We're not going to let that stand," Daniel said, and he was surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Not anymore." Evelyn took the photograph back, studying her brother's face one more time before setting it carefully on her desk. "No," she agreed. "We're not." At exactly 9 o'clock, they walked together down the hallway to Conference Room A. The largest meeting space in the building, it was designed for exactly this kind of high-stakes presentation. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, a massive screen for presentations, and windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The board members were already assembled, 7 men and women in expensive suits, holding coffee cups and tablets, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Roger Hale sat at the head of the table, the former CEO who'd now transitioned to board chairman. He was 68, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that came from 40 years of corporate dominance. He'd been the one to deny Daniel's request for a timeline extension on the Westfield project. The one who'd said, "Make it work," when Daniel had warned about team exhaustion. Daniel felt his hands clench involuntarily. He forced himself to relax, to breathe, to remember why he was here. "Evelyn? Daniel," Roger said, his voice professionally warm. "Thanks for joining us. We're eager to hear about this wellness initiative." They took their seats, Evelyn at the opposite end of the table from Roger, Daniel to her right. The positioning was deliberate, Evelyn had explained earlier. She was CEO, Roger's equal now, not a subordinate seeking approval. "Thank you all for making time for this presentation," Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. She clicked a button on the remote, and the screen behind her lit up with the presentation title, "The Michael Carter Memorial Program, a comprehensive approach to employee wellness and sustainable productivity." Daniel watched the board members' faces. Several shifted uncomfortably at the name. Patricia Morrison, the legal expert, made a note on her tablet. Robert Chen's expression remained carefully neutral. 3 years ago, Evelyn continued, this company lost a talented young analyst named Michael Carter. He died driving home after an overnight shift, having worked 17 hours straight to meet a deadline. The police report indicated he fell asleep at the wheel. He was 24 years old. The room was silent. Roger's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. "Michael was my brother," Evelyn said, and now several board members looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it because his death revealed something critical about our corporate culture. We were, and in many ways still are, treating people as disposable resources rather than human beings with limits. Evelyn, Roger began, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, please. Her tone was polite but unyielding. In the 3 years since Michael's death, I've been collecting data. Sick days, turnover rates, productivity metrics, employee satisfaction scores, and yes, workplace accidents and fatalities. The numbers tell a clear story. Our current approach to employee management is not only morally questionable, it's economically inefficient. She clicked to the next slide, showing graphs of increasing burnout rates correlated with declining productivity. Daniel watched the board members lean forward, studying the data. 8 months ago, we launched a pilot program in the analytics department, Evelyn continued. Mandatory rest periods between shifts, caps on weekly working hours, regular wellness check-ins, mental health resources. The results are on your screen. The graphs were striking. Productivity up 15%, sick days down 30%, turnover virtually eliminated. Even Robert Chen looked impressed. That's one department, Patricia Morrison said, her tone skeptical. Analytics was already high-performing. These numbers could be an anomaly. Which is exactly why we're proposing expansion to operations, Daniel said, speaking for the first time. 7 pairs of eyes turned to him. He felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice level. Operations is currently our lowest performing division. High turnover, missed deadlines, low morale. If the wellness program can turn that around, it proves the model works across performance levels. And you'll be leading this expansion? James Bradford asked. He was in his 50s, lean and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense. What's your background in organizational change management? None, Daniel admitted. My background is in project management and data analysis. But I have something more relevant. I was Michael Carter's manager when he died. I approved the overnight shift. I watched our culture prioritize deadlines over people, and I participated in that culture because I thought I had no choice. The room went very still. Daniel could feel Evelyn's eyes on him, supportive but letting him take the lead. For 3 years, I've carried the guilt of that decision, Daniel continued. I've worked late nights not because the work required it, but because I was punishing myself. I avoided CEO Carter because seeing her reminded me of my failure. I turned down promotions because I didn't believe I deserved advancement after what happened. Daniel, Roger said, his voice strained, this is hardly relevant to... It's completely relevant, Daniel interrupted, and was surprised by his own boldness. Because I'm not the only person in this company carrying guilt over workplace culture. How many other managers have watched their teams burn out and felt helpless to stop it? How many employees have sacrificed their health for deadlines they knew were unrealistic? How many of us have participated in a system we knew was broken because we thought we had no power to change it? Patricia Morrison was making rapid notes. Robert Chen had leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. The memorial program isn't just about preventing deaths, Daniel said, though that alone would justify it. It's about building a culture where people can be productive without destroying themselves, where managers don't have to choose between meeting deadlines and protecting their teams, where success doesn't require sacrifice of everything that makes life worth living. That's a beautiful sentiment, Robert Chen said, his tone dry. How much is it going to cost? Evelyn clicked to the next slide, a detailed budget breakdown. Initial implementation and operations, $400,000 for additional hiring, systems upgrades and training. Company-wide rollout, if approved, approximately $3 million over 2 years. $3 million, Robert repeated, for what amounts to letting people work less. For making people more effective during the hours they do work, Evelyn corrected. Robert, look at the productivity numbers again. Analytics increased output by 15% while working fewer hours. Do the math, that's not spending $3 million. That's investing $3 million to get $4 million back in improved efficiency. Assuming operations shows the same results, James Bradford said. That's why it's a pilot, Daniel said. 6 months, full documentation, regular reporting to the board. If the numbers don't support expansion, we'll reevaluate. And if they do support expansion, Roger said slowly, you're asking us to fundamentally restructure how this company operates, to tell our clients that we can't meet aggressive timelines because our employees need rest, to accept potentially missing deals because we won't ask people to work overnight shifts. I'm asking you to value human life over quarterly earnings, Evelyn said bluntly. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Daniel could see the board members exchanging glances, having silent conversations with raised eyebrows and subtle gestures. Finally, Patricia Morrison spoke. I have concerns about legal liability. If we acknowledge that our previous workplace culture was unsafe, we're potentially opening ourselves to lawsuits from former employees or families of deceased workers. Well, we're already exposed to that liability, Evelyn said. The question is whether we want to address it proactively or wait for litigation to force our hand. I'd rather change because it's right than change because we're legally compelled. I have concerns about competitive positioning, Robert Chen said. If we're capping hours and mandating rest while our competitors are running their teams into the ground, we could lose market share. Short term, maybe, Daniel said. Long term, we'll have the most stable, experienced, productive workforce in the industry. Competitors can't sustain the burnout model. They'll bleed talent and institutional knowledge. We'll be the company people want to work for, which means we'll attract the best employees. I have concerns about shareholder response, James Bradford added. $3 million investment with uncertain returns. How do we explain this to investors? We explain that we're reducing long-term risk while improving productivity, Evelyn said. We show them the analytics numbers. We demonstrate that ethical business practices and profitable business practices aren't mutually exclusive. And frankly, James, if our shareholders would rather we sacrifice employee lives than accept marginally smaller quarterly gains, maybe we need different shareholders. Roger's eyebrows shot up. That's a bold stance for a CEO to take. I'm aware, Evelyn said calmly, but I didn't accept this position to maintain the status quo. I accepted it to build something better. The board members looked at each other again. Daniel could feel the decision hanging in the balance, could sense the calculation happening behind their professional expressions. His hands were sweating. He wiped them discreetly on his pants under the table. I want to hear more about the operations implementation plan, Patricia Morrison said. Specific metrics, timeline, oversight structure. Daniel pulled up the detailed framework on his tablet, walking them through the 6-month plan. New hires to distribute workload. Mandatory training for managers on recognizing burnout. Anonymous reporting systems. Weekly team check-ins. Hard caps on consecutive working hours with automatic system lockouts to enforce compliance. Monthly reviews with the board to track progress. You've clearly thought this through, James Bradford said. He sounded almost impressed. We've done nothing but think about this for months, Evelyn said. This isn't a whim or an emotional response to grief. It's a comprehensive, data-driven approach to sustainable business practices. Robert Chen was studying his tablet, presumably reviewing the financial projections again. If, and I stress if, we approve the operations pilot, what happens if it fails? If productivity drops, turnover increases, clients start leaving? Then we'll have learned something valuable about implementation, Daniel said. Maybe the model needs adjustment. Maybe operations needs different support than analytics. Maybe some aspects work and others don't. Failure isn't the end of the conversation. It's data for refinement. And if it succeeds? Roger asked quietly. Evelyn met his eyes directly. Then we expand company-wide. We become the industry leader in employee wellness. We prove that profitability and humanity aren't mutually exclusive. And we honor the memory of every person we've lost to workplace culture by making sure no one else has to die for a deadline. The room fell silent again. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, the quiet hum of the ventilation system, the distant sound of voices in the hallway outside. Roger stood abruptly, moving to the windows. He stared out at the Boston skyline for a long moment, while the rest of the board waited. When he turned back, his expression was complex, resignation mixed with something that might have been respect. 3 years ago, Roger said slowly, I made a decision that contributed to Michael Carter's death. When his manager, when you, Daniel, asked for a timeline extension on the Westfield project, I said no. When you warned me about team exhaustion, I told you to manage it. I prioritized a merger deal over employee safety, and a young man died because of it. Daniel felt his breath catch. Evelyn had gone very still. I've thought about that decision every day since, Roger continued. Wondered if I'd made a different call, if Michael would still be alive. But I told myself it was just a tragic accident, that we couldn't have known, that sometimes these things happen. I told myself that because it was easier than admitting I'd valued profit over a human life. He moved back to the table, resting his hands on the back of his chair. Evelyn, when you took over as CEO, I wondered how long it would take you to bring this up. I wondered if you knew about my involvement. I wondered if you'd use it against me. I knew from the beginning, Evelyn said quietly. I read all the emails, Roger, saw every warning Daniel sent, every request you denied. But I'm not interested in blame or retribution. I'm interested in change. You should have fired me, Roger said. Maybe, Evelyn agreed. But firing you wouldn't have changed the system. It would have just swapped one executive for another who'd make the same decisions under the same pressures. I wanted to change the pressures instead. Roger nodded slowly, then looked around the table at his fellow board members. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say as board chairman. This program isn't just a good idea, it's a moral imperative. We've built a culture that kills people, and we've hidden behind euphemisms like competitive pressure and industry standards to avoid confronting that reality. Evelyn and Daniel are offering us a chance to do better. I think we should take it. Patricia Morrison looked surprised. Roger, the legal implications are concerning, yes, Roger interrupted. But you know what's more concerning? Explaining to another family why their child died for a quarterly earnings report. I'm done with that, Patricia. I'm old, I'm tired, and I want to retire knowing I helped build something worth being proud of. The shift in the room was palpable. Robert Chen uncrossed his arms, leaning forward. James Bradford set down his tablet. Patricia Morrison stopped taking notes. I propose we vote on the operations pilot, Roger said. 6 months, full implementation, Daniel as project lead with direct board oversight. All in favor? Roger's hand went up immediately. After a moment, James Bradford raised his hand. Then Robert Chen. Patricia Morrison hesitated, then nodded and raised hers as well. The remaining 3 board members followed suit. Unanimous, Roger said. The motion passes. Daniel, you're authorized to proceed with implementation starting next Monday. You'll report to the full board monthly with progress updates. Budget approved as presented. Evelyn, congratulations. You're about to change this company. Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking. Next to him, Evelyn had closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for trusting us with this. We won't let you down. See that you don't, Robert Chen said, but his tone was almost warm. I'm looking forward to being proven wrong about my skepticism. The meeting concluded with logistics discussions, budget authorization, HR coordination, timeline approvals. Daniel participated mechanically, still processing what had just happened. They'd won. The board had approved the pilot. In 6 months, they might actually change how this entire company operated. When the board members finally filed out, only Evelyn and Daniel remained in the conference room. They sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the presentation still displayed on the screen. We did it, Evelyn said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We did it, Daniel repeated, and then suddenly he was laughing, relief and disbelief pouring out in equal measure. They actually said yes. Roger Hale admitted he was wrong. Robert Chen looked impressed. They said yes. Evelyn was laughing too, tears running down her face. I can't believe that worked. I was so sure they'd push back harder, that we'd have to fight for every concession. Roger's speech, Daniel interrupted. Did you know he was going to say that? No. Evelyn shook her head. I had no idea he felt that way. I thought he'd buried it, compartmentalized it like executives do. Maybe people are more decent than we give them credit for, Daniel said. When confronted with the truth directly, when forced to acknowledge the consequences of their decisions, maybe they actually care. Or maybe they're just afraid of lawsuits, Evelyn said wryly, but she was smiling. Either way, we got what we needed. Now comes the hard part, actually delivering results. The weight of responsibility settled over Daniel like a heavy coat. 6 months to turn around operations, to prove the wellness model worked even in struggling departments. to collect data compelling enough to justify company-wide implementation, to honor Michael's memory by building the culture he deserved to work in. I need to call Jake's school, Daniel said suddenly. Tell them I'll be picking him up on time today. Every day this week, actually. Can't very well implement work-life balance if I'm not modeling it. Evelyn's smile widened. Good. And Daniel, thank you for standing up there and telling your story, for being honest about your guilt and your mistakes. That vulnerability made the difference, I think. Made it real for them instead of just abstract policy. It was terrifying, Daniel admitted. The best things usually are, Evelyn said. She stood gathering her materials. Come on. We have about 1,000 things to do before you can pick up Jake, starting with assembling your implementation team. They spent the rest of the day in planning sessions. Evelyn connected Daniel with the operations department heads, 3 managers who ranged from skeptical to cautiously optimistic about the wellness initiative. They discussed staffing needs, training requirements, system modifications. Daniel took copious notes, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and energized. At 3:30, Daniel's phone alarm went off, the reminder he'd set to leave in time for Jake's school pickup. Go, Evelyn said when she saw him glance at his phone. We can finish this tomorrow. You sure? We still haven't finalized the training schedule. Daniel, Evelyn's voice was firm but kind. You just sold the board on work-life balance. Now practice it. Go get your son. Daniel left the office at 3:45, something he hadn't done in months. He arrived at Jake's school with 10 minutes to spare, parking among the other parents waiting in the pickup line. When Jake emerged from the building, scanning for his aunt's car, his face transformed with shocked delight when he spotted Daniel's vehicle instead. Dad? Jake climbed into the back seat, buckling himself in. What are you doing here? Picking you up, Daniel said, like I should have been doing all along. Is everything okay? The question made Daniel's heart ache. What kind of father had he been that his son's first response to a normal pickup was concern that something was wrong? Everything's great, actually, Daniel said. I had a big meeting at work today. It went really well, and I realized I've been missing too many important things, so I'm going to be here more. After school, at games, whenever you need me. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying his father's face with those too perceptive 7-year-old eyes. Promise? Promise, Daniel said, and this time he meant it. This time he had the structure and support to actually keep it. They stopped for ice cream on the way home, a Monday afternoon treat for no particular reason except that Daniel wanted to. They sat at a small table, Jake with chocolate chip cookie dough, and Daniel with coffee flavor, and talked about school and friends and the science project Jake was working on about volcanoes. Can you help me with it? Jake asked. It's due next Friday. We have to build a model and everything. Absolutely, Daniel said. We'll work on it together this week. Maybe make it actually erupt if we can figure out the baking soda ratios. Jake's grin was brilliant. That would be so cool. Daniel's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Buzzed again. He continued ignoring it. You can check if you need to, Jake said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I don't need to, Daniel said firmly. I'm having ice cream with my son. Everything else can wait. The uncertainty faded from Jake's expression, replaced by something that looked like relief. They finished their ice cream, talking about nothing important and everything important simultaneously, and Daniel felt pieces of himself that had been fragmented for years beginning to knit back together. When they got home, Daniel actually helped with homework instead of retreating to his laptop. They built the foundation for the volcano project. They made dinner together, spaghetti and meatballs, Jake's favorite. They watched a movie, some animated thing about talking cars that Daniel found mildly entertaining and Jake found absolutely hilarious. At 8:30, Daniel tucked his son into bed, reading 2 chapters from the book they'd been working through, a fantasy novel about dragons and magic that Jake loved. Dad? Jake said as Daniel was turning off the light. Yeah, buddy? I like this version of you better, the one who comes home. Daniel's throat tightened. He moved back to the bed, sitting on the edge. I like this version better too. And Jake, I'm sorry I haven't been this version more often. I've been dealing with some hard stuff, and I let it take over my life. That wasn't fair to you. Are you still dealing with hard stuff? Yeah, Daniel said honestly. But I'm handling it better now. I have help and a purpose, and I'm remembering what's actually important. What's important? You, Daniel said simply. You're what's important. Being your dad, being present, being someone you can count on. Everything else is secondary. Jake threw his arms around Daniel's neck, hugging him tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, buddy, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. More than anything. After Jake fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He had 17 emails waiting, most of them related to the operations implementation. He responded to the urgent ones, flagged the rest for tomorrow, and closed his laptop by 9:30. His phone rang. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. Just checking in, she said when he answered. You made it home okay? Jake good? Yeah, we're good. Had ice cream, worked on his science project, watched a movie. Normal Monday evening things. Daniel paused. It felt really good, Evelyn. Being present, being there. That's what balance looks like, Evelyn said softly. I'm glad you're finding it. How are you doing with everything today? Honestly, I'm still processing. Evelyn's voice carried something Daniel couldn't quite identify. Relief, maybe, mixed with lingering disbelief. I expected to fight harder, expected more resistance. Roger's confession threw me completely. Do you think he meant it? Daniel asked. Or was it strategic? I think he meant it, Evelyn said, which is almost more unsettling. If he's been carrying guilt this whole time, working alongside me knowing his decision contributed to Michael's death, she trailed off. That's its own kind of burden. Guilt's like that, Daniel said quietly. It doesn't care about logic or proportional responsibility. It just sits there, heavy, reminding you of what you could have done differently. You sound like you're speaking from experience. 3 years of it, Daniel confirmed. But you know what? Today helped. Standing in front of the board, admitting my part in what happened, hearing Roger admit his, it didn't erase the guilt, but it made it feel less isolating, like I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Shared burden, Evelyn murmured. Maybe that's what this whole program is really about, not just preventing future tragedies, but acknowledging past ones. Letting people who've been suffering in silence know they're not alone. They talked for another 20 minutes about implementation details, team assignments, and next steps. But underneath the logistics, Daniel could hear the real conversation. Two people who'd been drowning in grief finding their way back to shore by building something that mattered. When they finally hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment, listening to the distant sounds of Jake's breathing from down the hall, and felt something he hadn't felt since before Michael's death. Peace wasn't quite the right word. The guilt was still there, the grief still present. But for the first time in 3 years, Daniel could imagine a future where those things didn't define him. Where he could be Jake's father, Evelyn's partner in this initiative, and maybe, eventually, someone who'd forgiven himself for being human. Tomorrow he'd start the operations implementation. Start building the teams, establishing protocols, proving that the wellness model could work even in struggling departments. It would be hard work, challenging and uncertain, with no guarantee of success. But tonight, Daniel Brooks went to bed at 10 o'clock, set his alarm for 6 a.m., and slept deeply for the first time in years. He dreamed of boardrooms transformed into playgrounds, of deadlines that valued life over profit, of a company where going home safe wasn't a luxury, but a promise. When morning came, he'd wake up ready to build that future. But for now, he rested, knowing that he wasn't running anymore, knowing that Evelyn believed in him, knowing that Jake was sleeping peacefully down the hall, knowing that Michael's death might actually mean something if they could pull this off. The guilt would probably never fully disappear. The memory of Michael's face in the morgue would likely haunt him forever. But Daniel was beginning to understand what Sarah had tried to tell him 3 years ago. He could spend his life apologizing, or he could spend it making sure it never happened again. He'd chosen the latter. And for the first time since that terrible Friday morning, Daniel believed he might actually succeed. The first day of the operations implementation began at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, with Daniel standing in front of 43 skeptical employees who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Conference room C was packed beyond capacity. People leaning against walls, sitting on the floor, a few standing in the doorway because there was literally no room left inside. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat, and someone in the back was eating a breakfast burrito that filled the room with the smell of eggs and salsa. Daniel had spent Monday setting up logistics with the operations department heads. Now came the hard part, convincing the actual employees that this wellness initiative wasn't just another corporate buzzword exercise designed to make executives feel good while changing nothing meaningful. "Good morning," Daniel began, and the low murmur of conversation didn't stop. He cleared his throat, spoke louder. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is early, and I know you're all busy, so I'll try to keep this brief." "Is this about the layoffs?" someone called from the back. Daniel couldn't see who. "There are no layoffs," Daniel said firmly. "This is about the opposite, actually. We're hiring additional staff to support your workload." That got their attention. The murmuring stopped. 43 pairs of eyes focused on him with varying degrees of suspicion and hope. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I've been with Morgan & Hale for 6 years, currently working as a senior program analyst. For the next 6 months, I'll be leading the implementation of what we're calling the Michael Carter Memorial Program, a comprehensive wellness initiative designed to make your job sustainable without sacrificing productivity." A woman in the front row raised her hand. She looked to be in her 30s, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well in months. "What does that actually mean, sustainable?" "It means we're implementing mandatory rest periods between shifts," Daniel said. "Maximum hours per week caps that will be enforced through system lockouts, regular check-ins about workload and stress levels, additional hiring to distribute work more evenly, mental health resources, anonymous reporting for unsafe working conditions, all the things that should have been standard practice but weren't." "Why now?" asked a man sitting on the floor near the wall. He wore a Morgan & Hale polo shirt that had seen better days, and his expression was deeply cynical. "Operations has been struggling for 2 years. Why does corporate suddenly care?" Daniel had anticipated this question. Evelyn had warned him that operations employees had been promised improvements before, only to be disappointed when budget cuts or strategic pivots made those promises evaporate. Trust would have to be earned, not assumed. 3 years ago, a young analyst named Michael Carter died driving home after an overnight shift, Daniel said, and the room went very quiet. He fell asleep at the wheel after working 17 hours straight to meet a deadline. He was 24 years old. I was his manager. I approved that overnight shift. You could have heard a pin drop. The woman with the dark circles had stopped fidgeting. The cynical man had straightened up, paying attention now. "For 3 years, I've lived with the guilt of that decision," Daniel continued. "I've worked late nights punishing myself. I've avoided people who reminded me of what happened. I've been an absent father to my 7-year-old son because I didn't think I deserved happiness after contributing to someone's death. And I've watched this company continue the same practices that killed Michael, prioritizing deadlines over people, treating exhaustion as a badge of honor, acting like employee well-being is optional." Daniel paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room. CEO Carter is Michael's sister. When she took over 8 months ago, she decided that enough was enough, that no more families should lose someone to workplace culture, that profitability and humanity aren't mutually exclusive. She convinced the board to approve a pilot program in analytics, and the results were remarkable. Productivity up 15%, turnover down to nearly zero, employee satisfaction at an all-time high. Analytics was already doing well, the cynical man pointed out. Easy to improve when you're starting from a good position. Exactly, Daniel agreed. Which is why we're expanding to operations next. You're struggling, high turnover, missed deadlines, low morale. If this program can turn things around here, it proves the model works. And then we take it company-wide. The woman in the front row was shaking her head. I've heard this before. New initiative, big promises, then nothing changes except we have to fill out more forms and attend more meetings. I understand your skepticism, Daniel said. If I were in your position, I'd feel the same way. But here's the difference. This program has teeth. The mandatory rest periods aren't suggestions, they're requirements. If you work 48 hours in a week, the system will literally lock you out of your computer for the weekend. If a manager asks you to work through a scheduled break, there's an anonymous reporting system with direct escalation to CEO Carter. If your workload is unsustainable, we're hiring people to share it, not just telling you to work smarter. How many people are you hiring? Asked a young man near the door. He looked fresh out of college, probably still optimistic enough to hope things might actually improve. 12 positions over the next month, Daniel said. 6 analysts, 4 project coordinators, 2 administrative support roles. The budget was approved yesterday by the board. HR is already posting the positions. That caused a stir. 12 new hires represented a significant investment, not the kind of thing corporate did for window dressing. People were exchanging glances, whispered conversations starting up. Here's what I need from all of you, Daniel said, raising his voice slightly to reclaim attention. Honesty. When I ask about your workload, tell me the truth. When the system asks how you're doing, don't just click fine if you're actually drowning. When something isn't working, speak up. This program only succeeds if you actually use it. And if it doesn't work? The cynical man asked. If we try all this and still end up burned out and overworked? What then? Then we'll have learned something valuable about what doesn't work, Daniel said. And we'll adjust. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution imposed from above. It's a framework that will adapt based on your feedback and the actual results we're seeing. I'm here every day for the next 6 months. My door is always open. If something needs to change, tell me and we'll change it. The woman in the front row raised her hand again. What happens after 6 months? If this works, if we're all happier and more productive, does it just end? Do we go back to the old way? If this works, Daniel said, we expand it company-wide. Every department, every division, from entry-level analysts to senior executives. We change the entire company culture. But we can only get there if operations proves it works. You're not just guinea pigs for an experiment. You're pioneers for a better way of working. A woman in the middle of the room, older than most of the others with gray streaking through her dark hair, stood up. I've been with operations for 14 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. I've seen a lot of initiatives come and go. Most of them were garbage dressed up as innovation. But Mr. Brooks, I appreciate that you stood up here and told us about your mistakes, about that young man who died. That takes courage. So I'm willing to give this a shot. But I'm watching. We all are. Don't make promises you can't keep. I won't, Daniel said. And thank you for the chance. The meeting continued for another 45 minutes. Daniel walked them through the specific protocols, answered questions about implementation timeline, explained the reporting systems and accountability measures. Some people remained skeptical. Others seemed cautiously optimistic. A few looked like they wanted to believe, but had been disappointed too many times to fully commit. When it finally ended, people filed out in clusters, discussing what they'd heard. The woman with the dark circles approached Daniel as the room emptied. Mr. Brooks, I'm Sarah Chen. I manage the client services team within operations. She extended her hand and Daniel shook it. I wanted to say thank you for being honest about why this matters to you personally. Makes it feel less like corporate theater. It's definitely not theater, Daniel assured her. How's your team doing? Workload manageable? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're surviving, barely. I've lost 3 people in the last 4 months, all left for companies with better work-life balance. The remaining 6 are covering the work of 9, and it shows. Mistakes are up, client satisfaction is down, and I've had 2 people break down crying in meetings in the past month alone. Daniel's chest tightened. That's exactly what this program is designed to address. Can we sit down this week? Go through your team's specific situation, figure out what support you need most urgently. Friday? Sarah suggested. I have a client call that might run late, but I could do 3 o'clock. Friday at 3 works, Daniel confirmed, adding it to his phone calendar. And Sarah? In the meantime, if anyone on your team is at a breaking point, don't wait until Friday. Come find me immediately. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I will. Thank you. Daniel spent the rest of Tuesday meeting with other operations managers, getting a clearer picture of the challenges each team faced. The stories were remarkably similar: understaffing, unrealistic deadlines, employees working 50 and 60-hour weeks just to keep up, managers feeling helpless to protect their teams while still meeting corporate expectations. By the time Daniel left the office at 5:30 to pick up Jake from school, he felt overwhelmed by the scope of the problem. Operations wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging. People were barely holding on, and the system had normalized that desperation as working hard. Jake was waiting by the front entrance with his backpack and a painting he'd made in art class. A surprisingly detailed rendering of a volcano with red and orange lava flowing down its sides. For the science project, Jake explained as they walked to the car, Mr. Henderson said we could use art class time to work on it. Cool, right? Very cool, Daniel agreed. That lava looks pretty realistic. I used sponges to make the texture, Jake said proudly, and I mixed the red and orange together so it would look like it's actually hot. We still need to build the actual volcano, though, the three-dimensional one. They stopped at a craft store on the way home, picking up chicken wire, papier-mâché supplies, and paint. At home, they cleared the kitchen table and started construction, Jake chattering about volcanic eruptions while Daniel shaped the wireframe and tried not to think about the 43 employees counting on him to fix an unfixable system. Dad, you're not listening, Jake said, pulling Daniel back to the present. Sorry, buddy. What did you say? I asked if volcanoes can erupt underwater, Jake repeated. Tommy said they can't because the water would put out the lava, but I think he's wrong. You're right, Tommy's wrong, Daniel said. Underwater volcanoes definitely exist. They're called submarine volcanoes, and they actually form new islands sometimes when the lava builds up enough. Jake's eyes widened. That's so cool. Can we put that in my report? Absolutely. They worked on the volcano for 2 hours, getting papier-mâché paste everywhere, laughing when Jake accidentally stuck his fingers together, creating something that vaguely resembled a mountain. It wasn't perfect, it leaned slightly to the left and the proportions were off, but Jake was delighted with it, and that was what mattered. After dinner and homework, after Jake was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and reviewed the data from the operations assessment meetings. The numbers were worse than he'd anticipated. Average weekly hours per employee, 56. Turnover rate, 43% annually. Average tenure, 18 months. Employee satisfaction score, 2.1 out of 10. His phone rang. Evelyn. Tell me it's not as bad as it looks, she said without preamble. It's worse, Daniel said. Evelyn, these people are drowning. Half of them are actively looking for other jobs. The other half have just given up. One manager told me she's had 2 employees have panic attacks in the last month. This isn't a struggling department. It's a department in crisis. Which means, if we can turn it around, the results will be that much more impressive, Evelyn said, though Daniel could hear the concern in her voice. What do you need? The 12 new hires as fast as HR can process them. Authorization to immediately implement the hour caps. I don't want to wait until the full team is in place, and I need to move the Friday reporting requirement for managers. They're spending 4 hours a week on status reports that no one reads. That's 4 hours of capacity we're wasting. Done, done, and done, Evelyn said. I'll send the authorization emails tonight. The hour caps go into effect Monday. What else? Back up, Daniel admitted. I've got 43 people watching to see if I actually deliver on my promises. If I mess this up, it doesn't just kill the operations pilot. It destroys any trust in the company's ability to change. I need to know you're behind me if I have to make unpopular decisions. Daniel, I didn't put you in this position because I wanted a yes man, Evelyn said firmly. I put you here because you understand what's at stake, and you're not afraid to make the hard calls. If you need to push back on deadlines, push back. If you need to tell a client we can't meet their timeline, tell them. If you need to override a senior manager who's prioritizing deliverables over employee welfare, override them. You have my full support. Even if it costs us clients? Even then, Evelyn said without hesitation. Though I don't think it will. Most clients would rather have reliable, high-quality work delivered sustainably than rushed garbage delivered by a team that's about to collapse. We just need to communicate clearly and set proper expectations. They talked through the week's priorities, team meetings, one-on-ones with struggling employees, the rollout of the hour tracking system. By the time they hung up, Daniel felt slightly less overwhelmed. Still terrified, but at least he had a plan. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a flurry of meetings, system implementations, and difficult conversations. Daniel met with every single operations employee individually, asking about their workload, their concerns, their needs. He discovered that a significant portion of their time was spent on administrative tasks that could be automated or delegated. He found projects that had been priorities months ago but no longer mattered, yet teams were still spending hours on them because no one had officially said to stop. He identified communication bottlenecks where information got lost between departments, causing duplicated work and missed deadlines. The new hires started arriving. Daniel personally onboarded each one, explaining the wellness initiative and the cultural shift they were trying to create. He assigned them strategically to the most overloaded teams, watching as the crushing workloads began to redistribute into something more manageable. The hour caps went into effect, and Daniel dealt with the inevitable pushback. Managers complained that they couldn't meet deadlines with artificial time restrictions. Daniel reviewed their timelines, found that most were based on the assumption of 50-plus-hour weeks, and reset expectations to assume 40-hour weeks with appropriate deadline extensions. Some clients complained. Daniel, with Evelyn's backing, explained the new approach and offered to terminate contracts if the clients preferred unrealistic timelines over sustainable quality. Most clients grumbled but accepted the new terms. 2 contracts terminated. Daniel counted it as a win. Sarah Chen's team was one of the first to stabilize. With 3 new hires distributed across her 6 existing employees, suddenly no one was working weekends. Mistakes decreased. Client satisfaction scores started climbing. In their Friday check-in at the end of week 3, Sarah looked like a different person, still tired but no longer on the edge of collapse. "I didn't think this would actually work," she admitted. "I thought it would be like every other initiative, good intentions that crumbled the first time someone from corporate demanded impossible results. But you've actually been fighting for us, pushing back on unrealistic demands, hiring real help, not just promising it. My team is starting to believe things might actually change." "They are changing," Daniel said. "How are you doing personally? I know you've been carrying a lot." Sarah's eyes welled up. She blinked quickly, trying to compose herself. "I've been a manager here for 3 years. In that time, I've watched 7 people burn out and quit. I've worked through holidays and weekends. I've missed my daughter's birthday parties and my son's soccer games because there was always some crisis that couldn't wait. I felt like a terrible mother and a failure as a manager, and I didn't know how to fix any of it." "That's not on you," Daniel said gently. "That's the system failing you." "I know that now," Sarah said. "But for a long time I thought I was just bad at this, that other managers figured out how to balance it all, and I was the only one struggling. Turns out everyone was struggling, we just weren't allowed to admit it." The conversation stayed with Daniel as he moved through the rest of his day. How many other people were suffering in silence, thinking they were alone in their struggle? How many managers were breaking themselves trying to protect their teams while meeting corporate demands? How much talent had the company lost because they'd normalized unsustainable working conditions? That night, helping Jake with his math homework, Daniel found himself thinking about Michael, about how Michael had probably felt honored to be asked to volunteer for the overnight shift, had probably seen it as proving his worth, had probably never considered that he could say no. The system had taught him that sacrifice was virtue, that exhaustion was dedication, that protecting himself was weakness. "Dad, you're doing it again," Jake said, tapping his pencil on the table. "The spacing out thing." "Sorry," Daniel said. "I was thinking about work." "Is work going okay?" Jake asked with the careful tone of a child who'd learned to gauge his parents' moods. "Yeah, actually," Daniel said, and realized it was true. "It's hard, and there's a lot to do, but I think we're making real progress. Helping people." "That's good," Jake said. "Mom always said you're really good at helping people. She said that's your best thing." Daniel's throat tightened. "When did she say that?" "Before the divorce. When I asked why you were always working." Jake's expression was matter-of-fact, the way children could be when discussing painful subjects. "She said you cared a lot about doing good work and helping your team, and sometimes that meant you had to work extra. But she said it was a good quality, just maybe too much sometimes." "Your mom is very wise," Daniel said quietly. "And she was right. I did work too much. I'm trying to be better about that now. Actually be here when I'm here, not just thinking about work all the time." "You are better," Jake said. "You picked me up every day this week. And we're building this awesome volcano together. And you helped me with my math without checking your phone even once. It was such a low bar. Basic parenting, fundamental presence. But Daniel felt proud anyway. Progress was progress, even when it was just meeting the minimum standard he should have maintained all along. The fourth week of the operations implementation brought the first monthly board report. Daniel spent days preparing, compiling data, creating visualizations, anticipating questions. The preliminary results were encouraging. Average hours down from 56 to 43 per week. Turnover completely stopped with 3 people who'd been planning to leave deciding to stay. Productivity maintaining despite reduced hours. Employee satisfaction up to 4.7 out of 10. It's working, Evelyn said, reviewing the presentation in her office the night before the board meeting. Daniel, these numbers are incredible for just 1 month in. It's too early to celebrate, Daniel cautioned. We're still only halfway through hiring. Some teams are adjusting better than others, and we haven't hit a real crisis yet, something that tests whether people will actually maintain boundaries under pressure. Always the pessimist, Evelyn said, but she was smiling. Realist, Daniel corrected. I want this to work, Evelyn. I want it to work so badly I can barely think about anything else. But I also know that sustainable change is hard, that old patterns are comfortable, that the first time we have a major deadline, there will be pressure to fall back on the old ways. Then we don't let that happen, Evelyn said simply. We hold the line. We remind people why this matters. We accept that some deadlines might slip in service of something more important. The board meeting the next morning was less contentious than Daniel had feared. Roger asked pointed questions about sustainability. Robert Chen wanted assurance that client relationships weren't suffering. Patricia Morrison pressed for details on the anonymous reporting system and whether any complaints had been filed. But overall, the board seemed cautiously pleased with the progress. Keep it up, Roger said at the meeting's conclusion. This is promising, but 1 month doesn't prove the model. I want to see these numbers hold steady through month 3 and 4. That's when the novelty wears off and we see if the changes are actually sustainable. Understood, Daniel said. We're in this for the long haul. As October turned into November, the operations pilot continued to stabilize. The last of the new hires came on board. Teams found their rhythm with the new workload distribution. The hour tracking system became routine rather than resented. Daniel started hearing laughter in the operations wing, seeing people actually taking their lunch breaks, noticing that the parking lot wasn't full at 7 p.m. anymore. But it was in early November that the first real test came. A major client, Thornton Industries, worth approximately $8 million annually, submitted a project request with a 3-week timeline that would require operations staff to work 50-plus hour weeks to complete. The request landed on Daniel's desk via Sarah Chen, who forwarded it with a single line. Here we go. Daniel read through the request twice, his stomach sinking. The project was complex, genuinely urgent for the client, and under the old system would have been accepted without question. Under the new system, it was exactly the kind of request they'd implemented the wellness program to prevent. He called an emergency meeting with the operations department heads, Evelyn, and the account manager who handled Thornton Industries. We can't do this timeline, Daniel said flatly, not without violating every principle we've spent 2 months implementing. Thornton is threatening to take their business elsewhere, the account manager, a young woman named Rebecca Martinez, said, her voice tight with stress. They're one of our top 5 clients. Losing them would be catastrophic. Then we explain the situation and negotiate a reasonable timeline, Evelyn said. I tried, Rebecca said. They're not budging. They say if we can't meet their needs, they'll find someone who can. Let them, Daniel said, and watched everyone in the room turn to stare at him. I mean it. If Thornton's business model requires us to destroy our employees' well-being, we don't want their business. Daniel, one of the department heads, said carefully, I appreciate the principle, but we're talking about $8 million. That's a lot of revenue to walk away from. And how much are we spending on turnover? Daniel countered. On recruiting, hiring, training replacements for burned-out employees? How much productivity are we losing to exhaustion and mistakes? How much legal liability are we accepting by creating unsafe working conditions? $8 million sounds significant until you factor in all the hidden costs of unsustainable practices. Evelyn was watching him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. What's your proposal? We go back to Thornton with a revised timeline, Daniel said. 6 weeks instead of 3, which allows us to complete the project with normal working hours. We explain our new workplace wellness initiative. Position it as ensuring higher quality work with less risk of errors. We offer a modest discount to compensate for the extended timeline. And if they still refuse, we help them transition to another vendor and wish them well. The board will have our heads, the department head muttered. The board approved this pilot specifically to test whether we could maintain profitability while prioritizing employee wellness, Evelyn said. This is that test. Daniel, draft the proposal. Rebecca, schedule a call with Thornton's leadership for tomorrow. Let's see if they're willing to work with us. The meeting with Thornton Industries the next day was tense. Their VP of Operations, a man named Gerald Thompson, listened to Daniel's revised proposal with increasing frustration visible on his face via the video conference. This is unacceptable, Gerald said when Daniel finished. We chose Morgan and Hale specifically because you had a reputation for meeting aggressive timelines. If that's changed, we need to reconsider our partnership. I understand your frustration, Daniel said, keeping his voice level. But I'd ask you to consider the long-term value of what we're offering. Under our previous approach, we would have accepted your 3-week timeline. We would have worked our teams to exhaustion. And statistically, the quality of work produced under those conditions would have been lower, with higher error rates and more need for revisions. The 6-week timeline allows us to deliver higher quality work, more thoroughly reviewed with lower risk of costly mistakes. That's corporate speak for, we can't handle the pressure anymore, Gerald said dismissively. Evelyn leaned forward into the camera frame. Mr. Thompson, 3 years ago, this company lost an employee who died driving home after an overnight shift. He was exhausted, working on a client deadline not unlike yours. He was 24 years old. His name was Michael Carter, and he was my brother. Gerald's expression shifted slightly, some of the dismissiveness fading. I became CEO with one goal, Evelyn continued, to make sure no other family loses someone to workplace culture, to build a company where profitability and humanity coexist. We're implementing new protocols across our organization, and yes, that means we can't accept timelines that require unsustainable hours. If that doesn't align with your needs, I genuinely understand and will help you transition to another vendor, but I won't compromise employee safety for any amount of revenue. The video call was silent for a long moment. Gerald looked down at something off camera, then back at the screen. 6 weeks, you said? 6 weeks with a 10% discount on our normal rate for this project tier, Daniel confirmed. And you guarantee the quality will be higher than your usual work? I guarantee the team won't be making decisions while exhausted, Daniel said, which historically correlates with better outcomes. Gerald nodded slowly. Let me discuss with my team. I'll have an answer by end of day. The call ended. Daniel and Evelyn sat in her office, staring at the blank screen. Either we just saved the wellness initiative's credibility, Evelyn said, or we just lost $8 million. Worth it either way, Daniel said. If we'd caved on this, everything we've built would have been meaningless. The operations team would have known the wellness program only mattered until it inconvenienced clients. Gerald Thompson called back 3 hours later. They'd accepted the revised timeline and discount, though he'd made it clear he wasn't happy about it. Daniel took the win and immediately sent a company-wide email to operations explaining what had happened and why, making it explicit that client demands would never override employee well-being. The response was overwhelming. People Daniel had never met sent thank you emails. Sarah Chen called him personally to say her team was ready to work their hardest on the Thornton project because they finally felt like the company valued them enough to protect them. The cynical man from the first meeting, whose name turned out to be Marcus Williams, stopped Daniel in the hallway to shake his hand and admit he might have been wrong about corporate initiatives being meaningless. That night, tucking Jake into bed, Daniel felt something he'd been chasing for 3 years without knowing how to find it. Not happiness exactly, and certainly not the absence of guilt, but purpose. The sense that what he did during the day actually mattered, that his work was building something meaningful rather than just filling time until he could escape back into hiding. "Dad?" Jake said sleepily. "Can I ask you something?" "Always, buddy." "Are you still sad about the person who died? The one you talk to Aunt Elena about sometimes?" Daniel considered the question carefully. Jake was perceptive, had clearly overheard more than Daniel realized. "Yeah," Daniel said honestly. "I'm still sad about Michael, I'll probably always be sad about that, but I'm doing something now that I think would make him proud. I'm trying to make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to other people. Does that make sense? Like how superheroes become superheroes because something bad happened, Jake said. They use the bad thing to help people. Exactly like that, Daniel said, smiling despite the tears pricking his eyes. I'm not a superhero, but I'm trying to help people. And that makes the sadness easier to carry. I think you're a superhero, Jake said matter-of-factly. A dad superhero. Daniel kissed his son's forehead, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. When Jake's breathing deepened into sleep, Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching his child and thinking about Michael. About Evelyn. About 43 employees in operations who were sleeping better now than they had in months. About a company slowly learning that people mattered more than profit margins. The guilt would never disappear completely. Daniel knew that now. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe the point wasn't to erase the past, but to honor it by building a better future. Maybe Michael's death could mean something if Daniel made sure it was the last preventable tragedy on his watch. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Thornton project officially confirmed. 6-week timeline. Everything as discussed. You did it, Daniel. You held the line. Daniel typed back. We did it. This was always team effort. Evelyn. Month 2 board report is going to be very interesting. Get some sleep. Big week ahead. Daniel plugged in his phone, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed. Through the wall, he could hear Jake's gentle snoring. Somewhere in the city, 43 operations employees were resting, knowing their company valued their well-being enough to sacrifice revenue when necessary. Somewhere, Evelyn Carter was probably still working, building the future her brother had deserved to live in. And Daniel Brooks, the man who'd spent 3 years running from his guilt, finally felt like he was running toward something instead. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, pick up Jake from Elena's after school, help with homework, and build a future where going home safe wasn't a privilege but a guarantee. But tonight, for the first time since Michael's death, Daniel slept without nightmares. The Thornton Industries project became the turning point that transformed skepticism into belief. Over the next 8 weeks, Daniel watched as the operations department evolved from a group of exhausted, demoralized employees barely holding on into something resembling an actual functional team. People started arriving at work without that haunted look of dread. Laughter returned to the break room. Someone brought in donuts on a Tuesday for no reason other than celebrating the fact that everyone had gone home at a reasonable hour for 2 weeks straight. By mid-December, the metrics were undeniable. Average weekly hours had stabilized at 41, productivity was up 22% from the pilot's start, turnover had dropped to 0 with 2 employees who'd left for other companies actually requesting to return, and employee satisfaction scores had climbed to 7.3 out of 10. The Thornton project had been delivered on schedule with 0 errors, prompting Gerald Thompson to send an email praising the quality and requesting Morgan and Hale for 3 additional projects in the coming year. Daniel sat in Evelyn's office 2 days before the final board presentation, reviewing the data one more time. 6 months had passed since that late-night conversation in the empty hallway when Evelyn had asked if he was still upset with her. 6 months since Daniel had stopped running from his guilt long enough to actually face it. 6 months of building something that mattered. You look nervous, Evelyn observed from behind her desk. She was reviewing the presentation on her laptop, occasionally making notes in the margins. I'm terrified, Daniel admitted. What if they still say no? What if they look at these numbers and decide it's too expensive, too risky, too different from how things have always been done? Then we find another company that will listen, Evelyn said. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Daniel, we've proven this works. Not just in theory, not just in a high-performing department, but in a division that was actively failing. If this board doesn't see the value in that, we take our model elsewhere. There are companies that would kill to have this kind of data supporting a cultural transformation. You'd really leave Morgan and Hale? Daniel asked. Your family has history here. Your brother worked here. This is where you built your career. My brother died here, Evelyn corrected quietly. Because the culture valued profit over people. If the board votes against company-wide implementation, it means they're choosing to maintain that culture. And I can't stay somewhere that's made that choice. Not anymore. Daniel understood. He felt the same way. The past 6 months had changed him fundamentally, not by erasing his guilt over Michael's death, but by channeling it into purpose. Going back to the old way, pretending that sustainable work practices were optional luxuries rather than moral imperatives, would destroy him more thoroughly than grief ever had. His phone buzzed. A text from Jake, sent from Elena's phone since 7-year-olds didn't have their own devices yet. "Good luck tomorrow, Dad. You're going to do great. I finished the volcano report and got an A. Love you." Daniel smiled, typing back. "So proud of you, buddy. Can't wait to celebrate tomorrow night. Love you more than all the volcanoes in the world." "Jake?" Evelyn asked. "Yeah. He got an A on his science project." Daniel set his phone down. 6 months ago, I didn't even know he had a science project due. Now I'm helping build volcanoes and attending basketball games and actually being present. That's what this program gave back to me, my son, my life. The ability to be a father instead of just going through the motions. That's what we need to emphasize tomorrow, Evelyn said. Not just the business metrics, though those are compelling, but the human impact. The parents who can now attend their kids' events, the employees who aren't having panic attacks, the managers who aren't watching their teams self-destruct, the lives that are measurably better because we chose to value people. They worked until 8 p.m., refining the presentation, anticipating objections, preparing responses to every question the board might raise. When they finally called it a night, Daniel drove home through December darkness, Boston's Christmas lights reflecting off recent snow, and felt cautiously hopeful for the first time in years. The final board presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Daniel arrived at 7:30, running through his sections one last time in an empty conference room. At 8:15, Evelyn found him there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You're going to wear a hole in the carpet," she said, handing him one of the cups. "Relax, we've got this." "Do we?" Daniel asked. "Evelyn, if they vote no, if all this work amounts to nothing—" "It already amounts to something," Evelyn interrupted. 43 people in operations are living better lives. That happened. That's real. Whether the board expands it company-wide doesn't change what we've already accomplished. "But Michael would be proud of what we've built," Evelyn said firmly. "Win or lose today, we honored his memory by fighting for change. That matters, Daniel. Don't let fear of the board's decision diminish what you've achieved." At 8:45, they made their way to conference room A. The board members were already assembled, the same 7 faces that had approved the pilot 6 months ago. Roger Hale sat at the head of the table, looking older somehow, as if the past half-year had aged him. Robert Chen was reviewing something on his tablet. Patricia Morrison was speaking quietly with James Bradford. Daniel and Evelyn took their positions. The presentation loaded on the screen behind them. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. "Thank you all for making time for this final report," Evelyn began. 6 months ago, you approved a pilot program in our operations division, testing whether comprehensive employee wellness initiatives could improve both human outcomes and business metrics. Today, Daniel and I are here to present the results and request authorization for company-wide implementation. She clicked to the first slide, a comparison chart showing operations metrics at the pilot's start versus current numbers. The improvements were stark, undeniable even to the most skeptical observer. "As you can see," Daniel said, taking over, "every key performance indicator has improved significantly. Productivity up 22%, turnover reduced to 0. Employee satisfaction increased by 5.2 points on a 10-point scale. Average working hours decreased from 56 to 41 per week. Client satisfaction scores for operations managed projects have increased by 18%. "That's impressive," Robert Chen said, though his tone remained cautious. "But operations was your worst performing division. It's possible these improvements reflect regression to the mean rather than the wellness program's effectiveness." Daniel had anticipated this objection. "We considered that possibility, which is why we also tracked analytics throughout the same period. Analytics was already high-performing when the initial pilot began 8 months before operations. Their metrics have continued to improve. Productivity up another 7% beyond the initial gains, turnover still at 0, satisfaction scores maintaining at 8.9 out of 10. The improvements aren't just struggling departments catching up. They're consistent across performance levels. Patricia Morrison raised her hand. I reviewed the Thornton Industries situation. You negotiated an extended timeline that could have cost us an $8 million client. That seems risky. It was risky, Evelyn agreed. It was also necessary. We had to demonstrate that the wellness protocols weren't just empty promises that would evaporate the moment they became inconvenient. The operations team needed to see that we valued their well-being more than we valued client revenue. And it worked, Daniel added. Not only did Thornton accept the revised timeline, they've since contracted us for 3 additional projects, specifically citing the quality improvement they experienced. The extended timeline produced better work with 0 errors, which strengthened the client relationship rather than damaging it. James Bradford leaned forward. Let's talk about cost. Company-wide implementation at the scale you're proposing represents a significant investment. $3 million over 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly. $2.8 million, Evelyn corrected. And that's gross cost, not accounting for savings from reduced turnover, lower healthcare costs, decreased recruitment expenses, and higher productivity. When you factor in those offsets, the net cost is closer to $1.2 million. That's less than we currently spend annually on turnover-related expenses alone. You're asking us to fundamentally change how this company operates, Roger said quietly. His expression was unreadable. To tell shareholders that we're prioritizing employee wellness over maximum profit extraction. To accept that some deals might not close because we won't meet aggressive timelines. That's not a small ask. No, it's not, Evelyn said. We're asking you to choose people over profits, to build a company culture where no one has to die for a deadline, to prove that ethical business practices and successful business practices can coexist. It's the hardest thing we could ask you to approve. It's also the most important. The room fell silent. Daniel could feel the decision hanging in the balance, could sense the calculations happening behind the board members' professional expressions. His mouth was dry. His hands were shaking slightly. He clasped them together under the table, trying to appear calm. I'd like to hear from Daniel, Roger said suddenly. You've been running operations implementation for 6 months. You've seen this program from the ground level. Do you genuinely believe this can work company-wide? Or are we looking at an anomaly that succeeded under specific conditions that can't be replicated? Daniel took a breath, choosing his words carefully. 6 months ago, I stood in a conference room with 43 people who didn't trust corporate, didn't believe change was possible, and were barely holding on. They'd been promised improvements before and been disappointed. They had every reason to be cynical about another initiative. He paused, making eye contact with each board member in turn. Today, those same 43 people are thriving. They're productive, engaged, healthy, and they believe this company actually values them. That transformation didn't happen because operations was special or because the timing was perfect. It happened because we made concrete changes with real enforcement and genuine leadership commitment. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gaining strength. Can it work company-wide? Yes. Will it be easy? No. There will be pushback from managers comfortable with the old ways. There will be clients who don't understand why we can't accept unsustainable timelines. There will be moments when maintaining these standards feels expensive and difficult and inconvenient. But every single challenge we faced in operations, we overcame. Not by compromising the program's integrity, but by holding firm and finding creative solutions. And the human cost if we don't expand? Patricia Morrison asked softly. More people will burn out, Daniel said simply. More families will lose parents to exhaustion-related accidents. More talented employees will leave for companies that treat them better. More managers will watch their teams self-destruct while feeling powerless to help. More memorial programs will be named after people who died for deadlines. That's the cost of maintaining the status quo. Robert Chen was making notes on his tablet. James Bradford was staring at the data charts displayed on the screen. Patricia Morrison's expression had softened into something that looked almost like sadness. Roger stood, moving to the windows as he had during the initial pilot approval meeting 6 months ago. He stared out at the Boston skyline for a long moment while everyone waited. I've been with this company for 42 years, Roger said finally, not turning around. I started as an entry-level analyst and worked my way up to CEO. I built my career on the principle that hard work and dedication, measured in hours and sacrifice, were the path to success. I believed that corporations existed to maximize shareholder value, and everything else was secondary. He turned to face the room. 3 years ago, my adherence to that philosophy contributed to Michael Carter's death. I denied timeline extensions. I ignored warnings about team exhaustion. I told Daniel to make it work when he asked for help. A young man died, and I told myself it was just a tragic accident because acknowledging my role would have required questioning everything I'd built my career on. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Evelyn had gone very still beside him. When Evelyn became CEO, I expected her to maintain the traditions that made this company successful, Roger continued. I thought she'd make minor adjustments around the edges, but keep the core philosophy intact. Instead, she challenged everything. She forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our culture. She proved that our assumptions about productivity and success were not just wrong, but actively harmful. Roger moved back to the table, resting his hands on the back of his chair. I'm 72 years old. I'm retiring at the end of this year. This will be one of my last major decisions as a board member, and I want to make it count. He looked directly at Evelyn, then at Daniel. I vote to approve company-wide implementation of the Michael Carter Memorial Program. Full authorization, full budget, with the understanding that this represents a fundamental cultural transformation rather than a temporary initiative. We're not just changing policies, we're changing who we are as a company. Patricia Morrison spoke next. I've reviewed the legal implications extensively. While there's some risk in acknowledging our previous culture was unsafe, there's far greater risk in continuing practices we know are harmful. I vote to approve. The financial analysis supports expansion, Robert Chen said. The return on investment, while not immediate, is substantial over a 3 to 5 year horizon. I vote to approve. James Bradford nodded. Industry positioning concerns are outweighed by the competitive advantage of having the most stable, experienced workforce in our sector. I vote to approve. The remaining 3 board members voiced their approval in quick succession. Daniel felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. They'd done it. The board had approved company-wide implementation. Unanimous, Roger said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. Evelyn, Daniel, congratulations. You're about to change not just this company, but potentially the entire industry. When other corporations see our results, see that treating people well actually improves business outcomes, some of them will follow. Maybe not all. Maybe not even most. But some. And that's how cultural change happens. One company at a time. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing implementation timelines, budget allocations, communication strategies. Daniel participated mechanically, still processing what had happened. They'd won. 6 months of work, 6 months of fear and hope, and desperate determination, and they'd actually won. When the board members finally filed out, only Evelyn and Daniel remained. They sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the presentation still displayed on the screen. We did it, Evelyn whispered. We did it, Daniel repeated, and then he was laughing, relief pouring out in waves. They said yes. They actually said yes. Evelyn was laughing too, tears running down her face. Roger's speech, Patricia's acknowledgement of the legal risks, Robert admitting the financial benefits. I can't believe that actually happened. Michael would be proud, Daniel said, and for the first time since his death, saying Michael's name didn't feel like swallowing glass. Evelyn, your brother would be so proud of what you've built. What we've built, Evelyn corrected. She wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. I couldn't have done this without you, Daniel. Your willingness to lead operations, to be vulnerable with employees, to stand firm on the Thornton timeline, that made the difference. You gave me a reason to stop hiding, Daniel said. A purpose bigger than my guilt. A way to honor Michael's memory that actually meant something. I'm the one who should be thanking you. They gathered their materials, shut down the presentation, and walked together down the hallway toward Evelyn's office. The building around them hummed with normal Thursday activity, people in meetings, phones ringing, the rhythmic clacking of keyboards. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility. What happens next? Daniel asked as they reached Evelyn's office. We start planning the company-wide rollout, Evelyn said. HR will need to develop training programs. We'll need to hire additional staff across multiple departments. Communications will have to craft messaging for employees and clients. It's going to be months of intensive work. I'm ready, Daniel said. I know you are. Evelyn smiled. But Daniel, I also need you to remember what you told the board about being present for Jake, about modeling work-life balance. You can't lead this expansion while working 60-hour weeks. That would undermine everything we're trying to build. Agreed, Daniel said. I'm picking Jake up from school at 3:30 today. We're going to celebrate with pizza and a movie. Tomorrow I'm leaving at 5. This weekend I'm completely off. Elena's watching Jake Saturday morning while I sleep in for the first time in 3 years, and then we're all going ice skating because Jake's been asking for weeks. Perfect, Evelyn said. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His sister, Elena. I should take this, he said. Evelyn nodded, and Daniel answered. Hey, Elena. Did the meeting happen yet? Elena asked, excitement clear in her voice. How did it go? They approved company-wide implementation, Daniel said, and heard his sister's delighted shriek through the phone. Daniel, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Daniel said, his throat tight. It's been a long 6 months. The longest I've seen you work on anything since... Elena paused. Since before the divorce, before Michael. You sound different, Danny. Lighter. I feel different, Daniel admitted. Still carrying some of the same weight, but it doesn't feel as crushing anymore. Like I'm using it to build something instead of just being buried by it. They talked for a few more minutes, Elena asking questions about the implementation timeline and what this meant for Daniel's role. When they finally hung up, Daniel found Evelyn watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked. You've changed, Evelyn said. 6 months ago, you could barely look at me. You worked late every night avoiding an empty apartment. You carried Michael's death like a life sentence. Now you're talking about sleeping in and ice skating and celebrating victories. It's good to see. I had help, Daniel said. You refused to let me keep hiding, pushed me into leadership when I was convinced I didn't deserve it, gave me a purpose bigger than my guilt. That's what made the difference. We helped each other, Evelyn said. I was drowning in grief and anger, channeling it into work but not actually healing, building this program with you, watching operations transform, seeing concrete proof that Michael's death could mean something. That helped me too. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Evelyn moved to her desk, picking up the framed photograph of her and Michael as teenagers. I keep thinking about what he'd say, Evelyn said softly, if he could see what we've built. The program named after him, the lives it's going to save, the culture it's going to change. He'd probably make some joke about corporate bureaucracy, Daniel said, remembering Michael's dry humor. Then he'd get serious and say he was proud, that this was exactly the kind of meaningful work he'd hoped to do someday. Yeah, Evelyn agreed, setting the photograph down carefully. Yeah, that sounds like him. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text. Sarah Chen. Heard the news already spreading through operations. Congratulations! We did it. Thank you for fighting for us. More texts followed. Marcus Williams, the initially cynical employee. Never thought I'd see the day. Thanks for proving me wrong. The young optimistic analyst, this is going to change everything. Other operations employees Daniel had worked with over the past 6 months, all celebrating, all grateful, all finally believing that corporate could actually care about people. The operations team is excited, Daniel said, showing Evelyn his phone. They should be, Evelyn said. They're the proof of concept that made this possible. Their success convinced the board. They're pioneers. Daniel spent the rest of the day in meetings, HR coordination, communications planning, initial discussions about expansion timelines. But at 3:15, he shut down his laptop, gathered his things, and headed for the door. Several people looked surprised to see him leaving early on a Thursday. Daniel just smiled and kept walking. He arrived at Jake's school 10 minutes early, parking in the pickup line and using the extra time to respond to a few final emails. When Jake emerged from the building, his face lit up exactly the way it had for weeks now, pure joy, at seeing his father there waiting. "Did the big meeting happen?" Jake asked, climbing into the back seat. "Did they say yes?" "They said yes," Daniel confirmed. "The program is going company-wide. We're going to help a lot more people." "That's so cool!" Jake buckled himself in, bouncing with excitement. "Can we celebrate? Maybe get pizza?" "Already planned on it," Daniel said. "Pizza, then that new animated movie you wanted to see. Sound good?" "Best day ever," Jake declared. They went to their favorite pizza place, a family-owned restaurant that knew them by name now. They ordered their usual, pepperoni for Jake, supreme for Daniel, and talked about school and friends and the upcoming winter break. Jake was animated, happy, completely comfortable in a way that broke Daniel's heart because it highlighted how uncomfortable his son had been for so long. "Dad," Jake said between bites of pizza, "remember when you used to work late all the time and I'd stay with Aunt Elena a lot?" "Yeah, buddy, I remember." "I like this better," Jake said simply. "When you're home. When we do stuff together." "Me too," Daniel said, his voice thick. "I'm sorry I wasn't around more before. I was dealing with some hard stuff, and I handled it badly. But I'm trying to be better now." "You are better," Jake said, with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You're the best dad." Daniel had to look away, blinking hard against sudden tears. He didn't feel like the best dad. Didn't feel like he deserved that title after years of absence masked as presence, of going through parenting motions while his mind stayed trapped in the past. But Jake believed it, and maybe that was enough. Maybe being present now mattered more than the time he'd wasted being absent. After dinner, they went to the movie, some animated adventure about a robot learning to feel emotions. Jake loved it. Daniel found himself actually paying attention instead of mentally reviewing work issues, actually laughing at the jokes instead of just pretending for his son's sake. When they got home, they built a blanket fort in the living room for no reason except that Jake wanted to, and they sat inside it playing cards until Jake's bedtime. "This was a really good day," Jake said as Daniel tucked him in. "One of my favorite days ever." "Mine too, buddy," Daniel said honestly. "Love you." "Love you more." "Impossible. I love you most." Jake giggled, the sound pure and joyful, and Daniel felt something in his chest unclench that had been tight for 3 years. After Jake fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, his laptop closed for once, just thinking. 6 months ago, he'd been standing in an empty hallway, frozen with fear, when Evelyn asked if he was still upset with her. He'd been running from guilt, working late to punish himself, barely functioning as a father or a human being. Now the Michael Carter Memorial Program was going company-wide. Operations had transformed from crisis to success story. Jake was happy and secure. And Daniel, for the first time since Michael's death, could imagine a future that wasn't defined by guilt and grief. His phone rang. "Evelyn." "Hope I'm not interrupting family time," she said when he answered. "Jake's asleep. What's up?" "I've been thinking," Evelyn said, and there was something in her voice Daniel couldn't identify. Nervousness, maybe. Uncertainty. "About us. About this partnership we've built over the past 6 months." Daniel's heart rate picked up. "Okay." "We've been through something intense together," Evelyn continued. "Shared grief, shared purpose, building something meaningful out of tragedy. We've talked almost every day for months. You know things about me no one else knows. I know things about you you've never told anyone." "Where are you going with this?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he knew. "I have feelings for you," Evelyn said bluntly. "More than professional respect, more than friendship. And I've been terrified to say anything because you're Michael's former manager, because you're a single father with enough to deal with, because mixing personal feelings with professional partnership seems like a disaster waiting to happen." Daniel felt like his lungs had forgotten how to work. "Evelyn, let me finish," she interrupted. "I know this is complicated. I know the timing is terrible. I know we have a massive company-wide implementation to manage, but I also can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. So I'm telling you, and if you don't feel the same, we can forget I said anything and just focus on the work. But if you do," she trailed off. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling a smile spread across his face despite the fear churning in his stomach. "I feel the same," he admitted. "I've been falling for you since that night in the conference room when you told me you'd known about Michael all along. maybe even before that. But Evelyn, I'm a mess. I'm a single dad. I'm still dealing with grief and guilt. I work too much even when I'm trying not to. And I'm the sister of the man who died on your watch, Evelyn interrupted. I'm a CEO with a demanding job and my own grief issues. We're both complicated, Daniel. That doesn't mean we can't try. What about the program? Daniel asked. The implementation? If we start dating and it doesn't work out, we still have to work together for months, maybe years. Then we'll be adults about it, Evelyn said. We'll communicate honestly, set boundaries, prioritize the work, or we can just not try at all, spend the next year wondering what might have been while maintaining professional distance and pretending we don't have feelings. Which option sounds better to you? Daniel laughed despite himself. When you put it that way, trying sounds less terrifying than not trying. So we try. Evelyn's voice carried hope and fear in equal measure. We try, Daniel confirmed. Slowly, carefully, with lots of communication and the understanding that both of us have complicated lives that take priority. I can work with that, Evelyn said, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. They talked for another hour, discussing what trying might look like, coffee dates when they could manage them, honest communication about needs and boundaries. Agreement that Jake came first for Daniel, and the company's transformation came first for both of them. No rushing, no pressure, just two people who cared about each other trying to see if something more might be possible. When they finally hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope. He'd been finding that over the past 6 months, but possibility. The sense that his life might include not just purpose and presence, but actual happiness. That he might deserve not just to function, but to thrive. The next morning, Daniel woke before his alarm, made breakfast for Jake, and got to work by 8. He spent the day in planning meetings for the company-wide rollout, working alongside Evelyn with a new awareness of her presence, of the way she smiled when she made a good point, of the competence and compassion she brought to every decision. At lunch, they grabbed coffee together, sitting in the building's cafe and talking about nothing work-related, books they'd read, places they wanted to travel someday, childhood memories. It felt natural, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years instead of for the first time. This is nice, Evelyn said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. Just talking, not about the program or the implementation or Michael, just us. Yeah, Daniel agreed. Though I have to leave in 20 minutes to make a 2 o'clock meeting with HR. See? Boundaries, priorities, we're already doing this right. That weekend, Daniel took Jake ice skating as promised. They glided around the rink, Jake wobbly but enthusiastic, Daniel rusty but remembering the basics from childhood lessons. They fell twice, laughed more times than Daniel could count, drank hot chocolate afterward while Jake chattered about how he wanted to take skating lessons and maybe play hockey someday. On Sunday, Evelyn texted, "Coffee tomorrow morning before work? There's a place near the office that makes amazing lattes." Daniel replied, "Sounds perfect. 7:30? Evelyn, "It's a date. Well, not officially a date. A casual coffee between colleagues who also maybe have feelings for each other." Daniel, "Definitely not overthinking this at all." Evelyn, "Not even a little bit." Monday morning, they met at the coffee shop, both arriving early and nervous. They ordered their drinks, found a quiet corner table, and talked about the weekend. Evelyn had visited Michael's grave, something she did monthly. She told him about the program expansion, about how his death was going to save other people's lives, about how she hoped he'd be proud. "I think he would be," Daniel said. "Proud of you for fighting this fight. Proud that his name is on something meaningful. Proud that you're changing the company from the inside out." "I hope so," Evelyn said softly. "Some days I feel like I'm doing this right. Other days I worry I'm just using corporate transformation as a way to avoid actually grieving." "Maybe it's both," Daniel suggested. "Grief doesn't have a timeline or a proper method. If building this program helps you process losing Michael, that's valid. It doesn't make it less genuine." "Is that what you've learned over the past 6 months?" Evelyn asked. "That grief and purpose can coexist?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "I used to think I had to choose, either drown in guilt over Michael's death or pretend it didn't affect me. Turns out there's a third option. Feel the grief, acknowledge the guilt, and use both to build something better. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes fuel instead of just weight. They talked until 7:50, then reluctantly headed to the office for a full day of implementation planning. Over the next several weeks, they fell into a rhythm: coffee before work once or twice a week, lunch together when schedules allowed, the occasional dinner after Jake was asleep at Elena's for the night. They moved slowly, carefully, building something that felt sustainable alongside the professional partnership they'd already established. The company-wide rollout began in January. Department by department, division by division, Morgan and Hale transformed. There was resistance as expected, managers who didn't want to change their working styles, employees skeptical that the wellness program would actually be enforced, clients who complained about new timeline policies. Daniel and Evelyn addressed each challenge as it arose, holding firm on the program's core principles while remaining flexible about implementation details. By March, the changes were visible across the entire company. The parking lot wasn't full at 8 p.m. anymore. People smiled in the hallways. Employee satisfaction scores company-wide had climbed to 6.8 out of 10 and were still rising. Turnover had dropped 37%. Productivity was up across all divisions. In April, a regional business magazine published a feature story about Morgan and Hale's transformation, titled "Putting People First: How One Company Proved Compassion and Profit Can Coexist." The article detailed Michael's death, the pilot program, and the company-wide implementation, positioning Morgan and Hale as an industry leader in employee wellness. The article prompted calls from 3 other companies asking about the program. Evelyn and Daniel spent hours consulting with these organizations, sharing their framework, helping them develop their own wellness initiatives. The transformation was spreading exactly as Roger had predicted. On a warm evening in late May, Daniel sat in the bleachers watching Jake's basketball team play their championship game. The Bruins were up by 4 points with 2 minutes left. Jake had made 3 baskets and seemed to have finally figured out how to bend his knees on free throws. Next to Daniel sat Elena, cheering enthusiastically. And on his other side, holding his hand where their fingers were interlaced, sat Evelyn. They'd been officially dating for 3 months now, though they'd kept it quiet at work to avoid complications. Jake knew, had met Evelyn several times and declared her pretty cool for a grown-up. Elena approved. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt like he was building a life instead of just surviving one. But Jake's really improved, Evelyn said as the game continued. He practices constantly, Elena said. Makes Daniel play with him every evening. Not every evening, Daniel protested. Some evenings we build things or read or watch movies. But mostly basketball, Elena said, grinning. The final buzzer sounded. The Bruins had won by 6 points. Jake ran to the stands, sweaty and ecstatic, and Daniel lifted his son in a huge hug. Did you see? Did you see? Jake was practically vibrating with excitement. I made 3 baskets, and I only fouled once. I saw everything, Daniel said. I'm so proud of you, buddy. We're going for pizza to celebrate, Elena announced. Everyone's invited. They went to Angelo's, the same place they'd gone after Jake's first game almost a year ago. The team crowded around tables, reliving the best plays, arguing good-naturedly about who'd contributed most to the win. Daniel sat with Jake on one side and Evelyn on the other, Elena across the table, and felt something close to contentment. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Chen. Just wanted to let you know, I got promoted to operations director. Thank you for everything you did to make this department a place worth staying in. We're all grateful. Daniel showed the text to Evelyn, who smiled. That's wonderful. She's earned it. She has, Daniel agreed. Remember when we first met with her? She looked like she was barely holding on. A lot of people looked like that, Evelyn said. Now they look like humans again, like people with lives outside of work. That's what we built. After dinner, after dropping Elena and Jake at home with promises to pick Jake up in the morning, Daniel and Evelyn drove to a quiet park overlooking the harbor. They sat on a bench, watching boats move across the water, the city lights reflecting on gentle waves. I've been thinking about something, Evelyn said. What's that? A year ago, I was drowning in grief and anger, working constantly to avoid feeling anything, convinced I had to change the company alone or die trying. She turned to look at Daniel. Then you came along, Reluctant, guilty, convinced you didn't deserve a second chance. And somehow we helped each other transform not just Morgan and Hale, but ourselves. "Where are you going with this?" Daniel asked, though he was smiling. "I'm saying I love you," Evelyn said simply. "I know it's soon. I know we're both still carrying grief. I know we're both complicated people with demanding lives. But I love you, Daniel Brooks. You're a good man, a good father, a good partner. And I wanted you to know." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you too," he said. "I've been terrified to say it because loving someone feels like tempting fate after everything I've lost. But Evelyn, I love you. You gave me back my life, gave me purpose and hope and the courage to stop running. You're remarkable." They kissed there on the bench, gentle and sweet, the city sparkling around them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We're really doing this," Evelyn said. "Building a life together while transforming a company." "Apparently we like a challenge," Daniel said. They sat for another hour, talking about the future, about the program's continued expansion, about Jake starting third grade in the fall, about the possibility of Evelyn meeting Daniel's ex-wife when she visited in June, establishing a friendship rather than awkwardness, about summer vacation plans and work deadlines and the million small details that made up a shared life. When Daniel finally drove home, it was past midnight. He found Jake asleep in the guest room at Elena's, carried him carefully to the car, then tucked him into bed at home without waking him. He stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching Jake sleep peacefully, and felt grateful in a way that went bone deep. 3 years ago, Michael Carter had died driving home exhausted. That tragedy had broken Daniel, had destroyed his marriage, had sent him spiraling into guilt and self-destruction. For years, he'd carried that weight alone, convinced he didn't deserve forgiveness or happiness or peace. But Michael's death had also led to this, to the memorial program that was saving lives across Morgan and Hale and spreading to other companies, to Daniel's partnership with Evelyn, professional and personal, to him becoming the father Jake deserved, to transformation born from tragedy, meaning extracted from loss. The guilt would probably never fully disappear. Some part of Daniel would always wonder what he could have done differently that night, how he might have saved Michael. But he'd learned to carry that guilt differently now, not as punishment, but as reminder. Reminder to value people over profits, to go home on time, to be present, to protect others the way he wished he'd protected Michael. His phone buzzed one final time. A text from Evelyn. "Thank you for tonight, for everything. Sleep well." Daniel replied, "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was too busy running to see what we could build. Sweet dreams." He set his phone on the nightstand, climbed into bed, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make breakfast for Jake, drop him at school, and head to work where he and Evelyn would continue building a company culture where no one had to choose between success and well-being. Tomorrow he'd leave work at a reasonable hour, pick up his son, help with homework, and be present for all the small moments that made up a life. Tomorrow he'd honor Michael's memory not through guilt and self-punishment, but through purpose and protection and proof that one person's death could prevent countless others. But tonight, Daniel Brooks, single father, reformed workaholic, man learning to forgive himself, slept peacefully, knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. The broken man who'd spent years running had finally stopped. And what he'd found in that stillness was worth everything it had cost to get there. Outside, Boston slept under a blanket of stars. Inside, Jake dreamed of basketball and volcanoes. And in the quiet of his bedroom, Daniel finally rested, carrying hope instead of just grief, building a future instead of hiding from the past. Michael Carter's death had been a tragedy, but the life it had inspired, the program, the transformation, the healing, was something approaching redemption, not erasing the past, but honoring it by building something better. And that, Daniel thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was the best anyone could hope for after surviving the unforgivable. Not forgetting, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing every single day to make sure it meant something. The memorial program would save lives. The company culture would change. And Daniel Brooks would go home every evening to his son, grateful for second chances and the remarkable woman who'd helped him believe he deserved one. That was enough. After years of carrying impossible guilt, that was finally, beautifully enough.